13 persons so far. But welcome to Caribbean Thought, week 11. We're coming down to the end. We have a lot to cover. But today I want to reintroduce some very important terms for class. Feminism, because the issue of is there. Somebody brought up the issue of, we introduced the issue of feminism last week. Just exploring the issue of masculinity and feminism, or femininity and masculinity, or the issue of sexuality, stemming from our approach and our view or theology of biblical scripture that we have inherited. And actually, I wanted to play a recording from a class I did in 2022 and 2021, Caribbean Thought, where I talk about the Bible as record. The Bible as record. And I don't think we have time to delve into it, but I will have to share that with you. But I had a lecture where we talked about the Bible, where I talked about the Bible as record in a previous Caribbean Thought class, not this particular class, but a previous 2021, 2022, the Bible as record. And I also lifted up the issue of identity, which if I don't have time to finish it here, you can look back at the records. And if you want to find it, I probably try and find the recording and send it to you. But I want to redefine feminism again, which is a socio-political ideology that talks about equality of the sexes. But of course, we talk about there's extreme to everything, and there's the radical feminism, radical feminists who believe that the woman must replace the man, the woman as dominant. Is there a place for that in Caribbean? We talked about how they were masculine posture, a very masculine posture, the privilege in the man, which has been handed out, and which is the independence that we have. Also, we inherited some of the colonial ideologies of privileging certain things. So, for example, we continue the trope of the man being dominant, and in our theology, Caribbean theology, of course, the man is dominant. But in almost all theologies, you find the man being dominant. But in Western civilization, but there is this ultra feminist view now that believes the radical feminism that talks about mother, God, and so on. Is there a place for that in Caribbean theology? Is that what Caribbean feminism, feminists? But the issue of nationalism, we lifted up, we defined nationalism already, what nationalism is, and we use Eli Kaduri's book, Nationalism, we defined that. But I also want to look briefly at socio-political. When we talk about socio-political, because the lecture that I'm going to be talking about today, I'm going to be looking at the socio-political context. I'm going to be presenting on a socio-political overview of Jamaica, and by extension the Caribbean, but more so the Jamaica, as an extension of the West Indies. But when we talk about socio-political, what are we talking about? It's the marriage of the social and the political. Okay, social being talking about society, commonality, companion, the social and the political, civil affairs, stemming. And when we look at political, we have to start to look at Aristotle, and even before Aristotle, Plato and Socrates, because those have influenced Aristotle. And the kind of political system and the idea of politics that we have has been inherited from that from the Greek Greco-Roman ideology or system. The ideology comes from that Aristotelian view, Platonic view, and of course there is and the structure could be Roman, which has informed Western civilization. As we get into the lecture, so what is socio-political? When we talk about Caribbean thought, we talk about the socio-political context, the socio-political nature of Caribbean. I will just briefly define that as we get into the class. And when we talk about fascism, I need to define that really quickly. Fascism, which is an ideology. We're talking about Caribbean thought. talking about thought in this class. So diverse currents that has shaped us and that are affected by us, not just historically. And last week when we did the poll, over 75% of you indicated that you are impacted. So you watch or view American television. So of course there is this influence, outside influence, which continues to impact the Caribbean. But there is the issue of fascism in the world today. How does that affect Caribbean and Caribbean thinking? The rise of fascism with Russia, which is going on with Russia and Trump and China. So we want to, what's going on in the world today? We want to briefly spend some time to discuss that. But outside of that, today we want to look at the socio-political nature of the Caribbean, of Jamaica, by extension the Caribbean. We want to delve briefly into Caribbean Fanonism, and then we will end with looking at nationalism and Garveyism, which are important political ideologies or thoughts or currents in the Caribbean. So that's what we will look at. That's what the lecture will entail today. Again, we will look at, we'll provide an overview of the socio-political context of Jamaica. When we talk about what is the socio-political context of Jamaica, what is the socio-political context of Jamaica? What are we talking about? And then when we talk about, we looked at Frantz Fanon and how important a figure he is in Caribbean ideology and post-colonial ideology and Pan-Africanism. So therefore, when we talk about Caribbean Fanonism, what are we talking about? How is his ideology? How are the ideas of Fanon important to the Caribbean Fanonism? And of course, we want to look at nationalism and Garveyism. We want to end on that. But before we delve into that, again, I want to quickly, when we begin the class, because we only have 14, I'm waiting until we have at least 15, 17 persons in the class. We will briefly look at the feminism, nationalism. Well, we won't look at nationalism because in the lecture today we will quickly talk about that, and then define feminism again, or quickly look at some feminists, and then go into the socio-political context of Jamaica, nationalism, Garveyism, Caribbean Fanonism. Okay, and so that's what we will delve into today. And that will end the class. No, I wanted to watch Who Shot the Sheriff. So next week, the first half of the class, we watch Who Shot the Sheriff. And then after that, I want to get into, we will probably discuss it briefly, and then I will have a discussion with you guys. I won't have a lecture per se. The last hour and a half, after we watch the film, I want to talk with you guys about where you are at in the class so far. What are you in terms of your papers and your work? I want to spend some time with you guys in the class in the last hour and a half, talking with you guys about where you are and how you are doing in terms of your papers and your research, and where you are, and any support that you guys need. We can explore that together. So we will begin in a couple of minutes. And it's now 7:27, so we will officially start in about 3 minutes, and we will wait for the other students to begin. So welcome to the class, guys. Somebody said they might, next week is Good Friday. Do we have a class on Good Friday? Do we have a I don't know if we have a class on Good Friday, guys. That's a good question. Next week is Good Friday. Do we have a class? I am not sure.
It's a public holiday.
It's a holiday, but we don't have a class next week. Oh, wow. So I think the final class is the week after next. I think the week, right? Is that I'm going to check my calendar to see when the final class is. So by next week, okay, fine. So I didn't realize that Good Friday is coming up on us, so I will have to think about that. I was hoping for this too. issue. Okay, we'll talk about the exam towards the end if we have time. But this class is very important. This class is very, 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 very important. The lecture, it's going to be a lecture presentation delving into some very important issues that I would like you to follow and to make notes and to revisit the particular lecture when it becomes available. I'm going to, of course, usually on YouTube or in video or on podcast in audio. So this is going to be a very important lecture because some of the conversations here will form some of the exam questions. So you guys have to pay attention and listen to it. We'll be right back after this. Okay, guys, welcome to the class. We will begin. Welcome to Caribbean Thought, week 11. Today's class, before we delve into the lecture for today, which will include looking at some very important topic, and by that I mean we want to look at the socio-political. We want to provide a socio-political overview of, and in the book Neoliberalism, Globalization, on page 41. I provide a brief overview of Jamaica's socio-political and economic context. So when we talk about Caribbean thought, we also have to look at the socio-political and economic context, and we have looked at in quite extensive detail in an introductory level. We have looked at the economic context. And we will look at that briefly today again. But when you look at Caribbean thought, when we study Caribbean thought, it also involves looking at the socio-political context. Okay, and I want to begin by looking at from 1493, leading up to the 1960s, and we talk about from Columbus buck up to independence. But when we talk about socio-political, what are we talking about? So we want to delve into that. We also want to look at Caribbean Fanonism, and that is also in neoliberalism, Caribbean Fanonism. What is that? What are we talking about? When we discuss Caribbean thought, I want to include a discussion on Caribbean Fanonism. And of course, we also want to look at if someone who is very important to Caribbean is none other, or Caribbean resistance, and not just Caribbean and Caribbean resistance and Caribbean ideology and Caribbean socio-political thought and so on. But someone who's very important is to the Pan-African movement and post-colonial movement, and to the civil rights movement here in the U.S. is none other than, of course, Marcus Garvey. And of course, in the book Neoliberalism, part 2 of the book here, which is the book is part 1 and part 2, I delve extensively into the issues of Black nationalism and Garveyism, And of course, it is entitled The Limitation of Black Nationalism and Garveyism. The Limitations of Black Nationalism and Garveyism. And just so you know, if Bustamante is very important to the union movement in the Caribbean, and in Jamaica especially. In Jamaica, Bustamante, very important figure when you think about the labor movement and the fight for workers' rights. When you talk about fight for women's rights and equality, and we're talking about people like Michael Manley, was very integral to that. Was a very integral person there. So a very integral figure in terms of the policy that he promoted. But Bustamante was very instrumental in terms of. I don't know if they still have the BITU, but the trade union in Jamaica called BITU. I don't know if they still have that. And then, of course, there was also Norman Manley, who was also helped to establish the trade union movement in Jamaica, or the labor movement in Jamaica, but more so Bustamante. And it was probably a marriage between them. But they have also contributed but they were also influenced by Garveyism, in a sense. And in a sense, it's Black nationalism, Bustamante. And so, but I say to you, there are limitations, and what has happened to the trade union movement, or to the trade union movement, to the labor movement, to the workers' union, not just in Jamaica and the Caribbean, but in the world. We talk about deunionization, and Professor Martin Oppenheimer, who wrote the book The State of Modern Society, and several other books. And he's also writing this second book with me that I looking at neoliberalism, neoliberal globalization reconsidered, neo-capitalism and the death of nations. Talked about the deunionization, and even today there is still unions are still not as organized as they used to be. Okay, but with what's going on in terms of with Amazon today, and with in the US, and but I'm not in terms of the Caribbean. I will have to ask you what's going on in terms of workers' unions and so on. But we are going to talk about nationalism and Garveyism, because those concepts and ideologies are very important in the whole labor movement and resistance in the Caribbean. But so we're going to look at that, but we want to start by delving into some of these very important concepts. Okay, so we will start there. But first, last week we talked about feminism, and I want to just quickly introduce that topic, this idea of feminism. And someone had asked that question about feminism, and there is a Caribbean feminism reading list by Nana Afua and Brantua and Dr. Andrea N. Baldwin. And there is this Black Woman Radicals Caribbean Feminist series. There is a series called the Caribbean Feminism series. And there's a Black Woman Radicals entitled Caribbean Feminism series, which is a 4-part online event series, which paying homage to historical and contemporary Caribbean feminists or feminism. Now, the series is curated and is hosted by educators, organizers, scholars, Nana Barunto and Dr. Andrea N. Baldwin. And Caribbean feminists and feminism are central and essential to national, regional, and global movements. And I'm going to say this again: Caribbean feminists and feminisms are central and essential to national, regional, and global movements, actively deconstructing the categories of race, ethnicity, and nation, and exposing their gendered character. And you can see the book Radok, written in 2007. Now, and part of this is also mobilizing for societal transformation. We talked about last week, feminism is a socio-political concept born out of Marxism, but on Marxist materialism. Usually it's on part, there's a Marxist ideology undercurrent there. But we talked about which the socio-political context which strive for the equality of all sexes. Of course, it's against discrimination. And one of the criticisms that I have levied against some feminist movements was that they were too myopic, or too, especially in terms of in the US, when women never had universal suffrage. They couldn't vote. Both, not just black women, but white women couldn't vote as well. Okay, and it was also, so white people women couldn't vote, black women couldn't vote, and black people also never had the right to vote. But in terms of the fight to attain universal suffrage, the ability to vote, their fight was still limited to and focused on securing the right for white women to attain universal suffrage. It did not go beyond dismantling discrimination. So we talk about, there was this issue of transference, and I think Professor Martin Oppenheimer and I talked about this whole issue of race, or the fight for justice and equality. And you talk about regional as against international and national, or groups. You have groups within the groups, or intergroup fight for equality. So, what is important here? So Caribbean feminism and feminism is central to this, looking at society in a very transformative way. By the way, feminism is about inclusivity. It's about inclusivity. And someone talked about, okay, the issue of inclusivity. Some people can be inclusive in one sense, but exclusive in another sense, depending on their particular predilections and proclivities. What am I talking about? Quite. What is the professor get where he's going somewhere? Yes, I am. This is very important. I am going to talk about an issue here. Say, for example, we can't be biased, we can't be pharisaical about issues. And by the way, okay, we can't be biased. Feminism talks about inclusivity. We talk, okay. So therefore, however, there is a clash somewhere. And when we talk about the clash, what are we talking about when we talk about the clash? This is the clash. Jamaica Theological Seminary wants to be a university. Let's have a discussion. And by the way, I'm referencing. There is a series, and you can go to YouTube and type in feminists in the Caribbean, and they have several YouTube videos that looks at or pay homage to Caribbean feminists. And I say to you that Caribbean feminism and feminisms are central and essential to national, regional, and global movements, actively deconstructing, according to Reddock in the 2007 book, actively deconstructing the categories of race, ethnicity, and nation, and exposing their gendered character, their gender. We talk about, okay, gendered character, deconstructing the gendered, exposing and deconstructing the gendered character, and mobilizing for societal transformation. So of course, feminism is against privilege. It's against privilege and the power that promotes exceptionalism and exclusivity. And so there is an issue of power when we talk about sexual identity. So the series, Caribbean Feminism series, is a pays homage to the pioneering work of feminists such as Guyanese grassroots activist Adeye, Grenadian feminist scholar Udine Barretier, Jamaican diplomat Lucille M. Mayer, Curatian cultural anthropologist Rosemary Allen, Trinidad and Tobagan Calypsonian Calypso Rose, as well as a space for engaging with contemporary Caribbean feminists, scholars, activists, and artists across generations, borders, and languages. And feminists, it's part of this skepticism, part of this critical thinking, part of this subaltern ideology, history from below perspective, usually activists fighting for equality, fighting for people who are discriminated against, fighting for people who are vulnerable. Part of that group. And there is also, so there is always this drive, so there is also this nationalistic ideology of the feminist. Now, just so you know, and this is very important, we talk about Caribbean feminists and this idea, and just so you know, the Caribbean feminism series, they have several series on YouTube. One of them is called the Digital Caribbean Feminisms, which looks at the usage of the internet for space and placemaking, which has been multi-generational, multi-ethnic, transnational, and pan-Caribbean. And for Caribbean feminist activists, archivists, artists, scholars, so on and so forth, a space which has played a key role in archiving and curating knowledge and producing and sharing and organizing and mobilizing and so on and so forth, which has facilitated increased and amplified voices of the perspectives of Caribbean women, girls, femmes, gender, non-conforming, non-binary, within and across the region. So Caribbean feminism, which is a group of feminists, which is led by Nana Barunto and Dr. Andrea, provide a staple of information for people who are interested in terms of Caribbean thought and want to see how the import and people. If there is a group in the class studying Caribbean feminism, you can check that. You can go on. You can check www.blackwomenradicals.com. Okay, and I can provide you with some more information if you so desire. That's okay. Which is very important. Now, by the way, there is also some notable characters in Caribbean feminism that I have to lift up in terms of, which is always, and their message is always this, which is why we need organizing that is anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist. Our organizing, and feminists are always organizing, organizers. We talk about labor, organizing labor. Talk about social group. We talk about change. Change requires masses of people who are organized to bring about change. When we did that, we talk about Haiti and preventing an intervention force. We want to advocate on behalf of the Haitians against the power brokers of the day. So we are looking for people to sign so that we can, so as to apply pressure, because when you talk about, earlier we talk about violence and or force or colonization is pressure from above, and therefore the system is set up in a way to unseat the status quo. So therefore, those who are being pressured have to organize. So when people can come together, and what race does is that it puts people in group. What ethnic? When you start thinking, nationalism is important, but when you start thinking in terms of categories, nations and ethnicities, and when you start to think in terms of racial, when you start thinking racially, then it affects social groups who are discriminated against. It affects masses. It affects the ability of people to mobilize and to come together, to organize. Organizing is very important. We talk about you want change. We talk about what are the opportunities for the Caribbean, okay? The Caribbean to become prosperous, to become competitive, to move beyond the level of dependency, okay? It's a more united Caribbean. The Caribbean has to become united, a unity that has and we talk about when the Caribbean was becoming, when we were becoming independent in 1960, just before that, there was a discussion about a federation, about a Caribbean union. But of course, there was this selfishness that crept in. This nationalism gave way to a union, a kind of regional union that was necessary for the Caribbean to rise above what was coming in the future. Okay? So organizing is important, and so that is when you study power, when you study the colonization, and when you study systematic discrimination in society and race and so on and so forth. Discrimination is only possible, okay? The violence of discrimination, the violence of apartheid, the violence of power through coercion, through force, whatever, okay? The violence of it requires a strategy. And the strategy is always to divide and conquer, to divide and conquer. So when you have a society, and when you study society, you look at how the society is constructed and for whose interests, whose interests, and okay, and how it is constructed, and when you look at this and you study certain society that is divided based on race, or if it is not divided based on race, say for example the Caribbean is based on class, and class and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes when we begin the lecture. We're also going to talk about what is this the social structure of society in Jamaica. It is still based in some class. Okay, there is still a society based in class, and one's education and one belonging to a particular social group or religious group or position and so on and so forth determines one's class and one's position. And in a sense, society has conditioned this privilege based in categories, based in based in groups, which affects any ability of the populace, any ability of the masses, any ability of the subjugated groups to be able to come together, yes, to offset or to pressure the oppressor. So that is important in terms of so feminists talk about talks about the issue of organizing. Why we need organizing that is anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist. Notice anti-capitalist is always anti some political, socio-political, or economic. Anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist. Our organizing must also be an anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic, anti-transphobic, and against all forms of exploitations, subordination, and discrimination. All forms. Talk about, remember, feminism is about promotes to include the equality of the sexes, and not just the sexes, but by extension, if they talk about equality, they talk about then the equality of groups in society. And of course, the feminists would go on to say why we need organizing against the forms of exploitation, subordination, and discrimination. That the left, when we talk about the left and the right, we're talking about politically, that the left has traditionally ignored or downplayed. Our organizing must also be anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist. And that's according to Adeye, which is in 2009 on gender, race, and the class, a perspective on the contemporary Caribbean struggle. Now, it's very there's some other readings that you can look to, but there are some notable Caribbean feminists that we have. We talk about Louise Bennett Coverley on Caribbean Insights. There's also Jamaica Kincaid, Erna Broadber, and Nicole Dennis Ben. There are several Caribbean feminists that you can actually point to, and I'm going to invite you to just visit blackwomenradicals.com. I was going to reference a very important point as I delve into the lecture today, which is Jamaica Theological Seminary wants to be a university, and I always bring this up. Jamaica Theological Seminary wants to be a university, and in 2000 and I think I was on the steering committee at JTS, and one of the things I said to JTS was that if you're thinking about becoming a university, it means you're going to be attracting students from all walks of life. Okay, you have to also look at what's going on in society today. So I said you have to change your motto, probably. You might have to make it more inclusive. So the motto is now, the JTS motto is that maybe I should do a poll here. JTS motto is that I may know him, that I make him know. That I may know him, that I may know him, that I might make him know. That is JTS. And of course, I have said that what JTS, since we are also thinking of, in the future, thinking about becoming a university, we also need to also think about looking at what's going on in society with the Me Too movement. Some time ago, about 2 years ago, the rise of the Me Too movement, and women, and in terms of women who promoting women's rights and equality. And there was this talk about this Me Too movement. I'm saying that we may also have to start thinking about changing the language. Instead of saying that I may make him know, and so on and so forth, that I may know God and that I make God known. And persons had a problem with that. People had a problem with that, saying there's no place for that, and that's not what it's about, so on and so forth. But I was saying that if we talk about feminism and Caribbean feminism, of course, feminists, if we're talking about inclusivity, and against sexism and so on and so forth, of course, that they will have a problem with that particular statement. Okay. So question for you guys: do you think that the JTS's motto is anti-inclusive? Is it and anti? Does it promote privilege? What do you guys think about that? By the way, there is also Blossom White, who is past Reverend Renard White. Wife. She is a notable feminist that you can check out as well. I want to. What do you guys think about the motto, JTS's motto? For you guys, what do you guys think about that, JTS's motto? What do you guys think about that?
Sir, could you repeat your question, please?
Did you guys, JTS's motto is that I may know God, and that I may make him known. What do you guys feel about? Have you ever thought about that motto? Question: do you guys think that is that an anti-inclusive statement? Does that speak to the issue of privilege? Does that particular statement speak to the issue of privilege? And is it anti-inclusive? And do you believe that it should be adjusted?
So what kind of privilege are you referring to?
I mean, what do you think, guys, based on all what we've discussed? All right. What do you guys think? What do you think the privilege I'm talking about? Talk about what? Okay, fine. Question then. Do you? Thank you so much. Well, let's steer the argument that way. Does that statement, does that motto contain privilege? Does it contain privilege? And if privilege, what kind of privilege?
So I'm not sure about the privilege part, because I feel like every other institution and have different thing, that foundation that it's built on. And I feel like if JTS is a Christian institution, sir, and it was first a theological institution before it opened its gate to including a lot more persons, that like now. So I'm not sure if I think it should be adjusted, because I feel like everybody is entitled to having I guess a certain standards. I feel like our secular institution is built on a certain foundation, and those things will go to their foundation and say, I think it should be changed. So
okay, I have a poll, and the poll is going on right, and it's launched. I'm gonna invite you guys to participate in the poll. I will end it in 10 minutes. Participate in the poll, okay? Let me see if you have the poll there. Let me bring it up. Let me bring it up again. And I wanna actually share my screen. Share. Okay. Does the JTS motto contain privilege? Okay. Does the JTS motto
Sir, good evening, colleagues. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
I'm looking for the raise hand feature and I'm not seeing it. I would like to answer the same question that I think it was Tash who just attempted,
By the way,
yeah,
go ahead, answer. And by the way, whoever just answered, you said what kind of privilege. You're not sure if the entire privilege, but then you went on. Now, I want you to listen to your line.
You're talking about Christian privilege, sir. If I may finish before you come in, please.
Yes.
So yes, I have already answered the poll, and I answered yes, it does contain privilege. The motto is speaking about the persons, the students who are connected to JTS being evangelists, evangelizing. As she said earlier in her response, JTS was founded on a Christian principle, and Christianity is Christ-centered. So in that, it is privilege. However, personally, I believe that this is a privilege that is open to everyone. And so it's not an exclusive, though they may say that Christianity give privilege to some and none to others. It's a privilege that is open to everyone. You may choose to become a Christian, you may choose to become a Muslim. That's your right and privilege, you know, to join that movement or religion, for want of a better term in this instance. I believe that JTS wanting to become a university does not exclude them remaining a Christian-centered institution. There are other institutions, Christian universities elsewhere in the world. And so to become a university, I don't know that this is a requirement here. Why drop the principle, the founding principles of the school? I mean, it's not, look at a UE and a UTech. While UE will offer engineering courses, you find that mechanical engineers and civil engineers, they go to UTech, right? So while someone wanting to be a lawyer will go to UE, that's the privilege, that's the preference based on what is offered. So while it might be perceived as Christian privilege, it is something that's open to anyone who wants to be a Christian. And JTS has opened its door to non-Christians. I don't think it needs to, you know, change the founding principle and get rid of that I may know him and that I may make him known. And that is why look at NCU. They, in their guidance courses, in their social work courses, they offer Christian studies as well. It's a part of their structure. You have to do these courses. You choose to go there. Other institutions offer this. So that's my bit on the topic.
Okay, all right. Anybody else?
Good evening.
Yes,
Yeah.
good evening.
I had to change device, especially it's because I can't really talk on the computer. I don't know why. So, yes, for me, I think the motto can be adjusted. And I don't think adjusting the motto changed the relevance or the standard and value of the Jamaica Theological Seminary. I do believe that your motto can be adjusted and there's still Christian principle. There are still courses that we have to do. For example, reading the Bible as literature is one of those prerequisite courses. We have spiritual formation. I don't think changing the motto of the institution take away the standard or the value that it brings. I don't think changing the motto or would take away from the principle or the Christian value that it was founded on. I don't think it does that. However, what I do see though, based on the fact that a lot of us know that Jamaica Theological Seminary is a seminary, right? And in most cases, what we see happen, and I heard Christine share her tidbit. In most cases, when you're thinking about revolution, when you're thinking about growth, when you're thinking about how the world is and how society is, and as things and times changes, as season changes, as we grow, as you know, all the different elements or factors that affects education and everything, I do believe with what is happening in our society that we have to also not lower our standard, not in some sense dilute, but in most cases adjust to the narrative. A lot has changed, a lot is changing, and nothing remains the same forever. And changing the name or taking out or restructuring the motto of the institution will not take away what this institution stands for. Because it's not like we're saying, oh, we're taking out the theology courses, we're taking out, say, spiritual formation, we're taking out what do you call that again? Reading the Bible as a literature. These are courses that we still have to do. And that doesn't mean that we know that on the premise that we're coming into a theological institution. We know that there are a lot of Christian principles here. we know that because most of us would have read even a fraction of the manual. Some of us would have read the documents that would have signed up. So we understand the different values that the institution have. So
Great.
we already know all of this.
Thank you so much. And the poll, we're going to end the poll. 11 of 17, only 11 of 17. Are you guys seeing the poll? So far, 8 of 11 believe that does the JTS motto contain privilege? Yes, no, 3%. And of course, somebody said that, of course, yes, it involved the level of entitlement. But the question is, when we talk about privilege, we're just talking about femininity or masculine posture. So let's push it a little bit further. Privilege, Christian privilege, yes, but what about the issue of inclusivity? Is that statement anti-feminist? Is it an anti-feminist statement? What do you think Caribbean feminism? How would Caribbean feminists react to a statement like this? And of course, we're talking about, we're no longer, when I said seminary, we won't be a seminary anymore, we'll be a university, okay? But so the next one is it anti-feminist? Is it to say that I may know God, that I may know him, and that I may make him known? Is it first of all, is it anti-feminist? And is it or is it anti-inclusive? Is it exceptional or not? And of course, depending on who you are and your experiences. So now I'm okay. So, I remember, you have to hurt. Part of critical thinking is, of course, fine, you have stated your position. But let us go beyond the position that the position that you're comfortable with. You're comfortable with that position. But let us go beyond that. Talk about the issue of inclusivity. And if you're talking about feminists, is it a statement that a feminist would accept? And is it inclusive? Is it inclusive and is it anti-Christian, or is it, that I may know God and that I may make God known? Okay, so of course, but what you have said is very important. Talk about the foundations of our Christianity. The foundations of our Christianity informs Jamaica Theological Seminary, informs an institution. Wow, I'm so happy you guys are getting me into this. I don't know why you guys are getting into this like this today. I want to bring up something. Here we go. Actually, there's something I have to, there's something that came with Michel Foucault. I have to bring Michel Foucault here. Here we go, Michel Foucault. And Michel Foucault is a very important philosopher, historian, writer, political activist, literary critic. The kind of, he's from the same school, or Frantz Fanon is from that same school. Jean Sartre is from that same school. Postmodernist, literary critics. Michel Foucault theories primarily addresses the relationship between power and knowledge, and how they are used as a form of social control through societal institutions. Michel Foucault, or Paul Michel Foucault, a French philosopher, writer, political activist, he addresses the relationship between power and knowledge and how they are used as a form of social control through societal institutions. And he's often cited as a structuralist or postmodernist, although he rejects these labels. But what is important is this marriage between institutions. And of course, we talk about Gramsci, and I have a book written by Gramsci here, The Prison Notebooks, Antonio Gramsci, Prison Notebooks, very important book that looks at intellectualism. And he eschews intellectualism, talked about the problem of history and culture, the formulation of intellectuals, the formulation of intellectuals. Institution helps to drive certain positions. And institutions is very important in society to maintain, again, control. And of course, we said that Kant was suspicious. Kant, not Foucault now, but Kant, Immanuel Kant, was suspicious of David Hume's thermodynamic, or using it while he give credence to his idea of thermodynamics. You cannot extend it to all things in society and in all places. So as if you cannot come to society or to things and you cannot think of institutions as existing in and of itself. Okay. You have to look at it outside of a moral history. It's not a history that has not been tainted by man's understanding of things. A history that we have, or theology probably is, so Jamaica Theological Seminary started in the 1960s, inherited a theology that, where does that theology? So then you start studying the foundation. Who started JTS? And of course, we said the missionary church started JTS, and of course that is important. So in order to understand the statement, you have to of course understand the foundation is that it comes from the missionary church. The missionary church. What is the doctrinal position of the missionary church? And the doctrine, okay, and where does that doctrinal position come from? And of course, it continues to be born. But of course, we're saying that in light of the Me Too movement and what's going on in society, okay, talk about the Caribbean society, who we are, and how we were founded, and how we came to be. Okay, will not have evolved, because how we came about through conquest and slavery and violence and so on and so forth, and our reality continues in a sense through strategy and stealth. But who we are and who we came to be and who we ought and who we are going and where we're going, it's constantly evolving to take, okay, our identity. But certain institutions that have that we talk about the Bible as record, and I talk about we talk about institutions and how we have inherited certain ideologies. I mean, not that they are bad or good. That's not where I'm going with this, of course. Where I'm going is that we are exploring all things, and we talk about feminism. Is it a feminist statement? Of course, it is not a feminist statement. Feminists wouldn't accept this. This is not feminist. It's not a feminist statement. A feminist would not. If feminists would be not. It's not just talk about equality. When you are striving for equality and inclusivity, means abandoning the language and the institutions, and means adapting and adjusting the norms and certain things that helps to condition a particular kind of privilege that maintains exclusivity. So of course the language is anti-feminist. The language is anti-inclusive. Okay, the anti is born within a masculine posture, even if you believe that God is man. Okay, and of course there are some churches that believe otherwise today. They okay, of course, so for example, the Anglican Church and some Protestant churches and the United Church and so on in the Caribbean, they are now taking on an inclusive and a kind of some more inclusive kind of understanding of the divine. Of course, you talk about the Jamaica Theological Seminary as against Northern Caribbean University, as against UTCWI. Then you start to when you start to study Caribbean theology and you just look at Jamaica and the theological institutions in Jamaica, each denomination, okay, UTC of course would not have that because would not have that because they are bent in a particular way. They are okay in a sense. The UTCWI in a sense have a kind of socio-political and activist nationalist kind of an influence, especially with the proximity with UN and so on and so forth. This academic, they're bent in a very academic way, an academic bent, which is a little bit different from if you go to which is and the NCW is also kind of bent that way in a sense, because UTC trains United Church pastors, but of course United Church is partially owns Northern Caribbean University, and some pastors used to go to UTC, but now you can go to Northern Caribbean University. But when you and of course the United Church in Jamaica and the Cayman Islands is in Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. A lot of Jamaica churches are spread throughout the Caribbean. Okay, and of course Christian theology is part of the dominant religion within the Caribbean, and of course there's no really separation between state and church. Religion plays a very important role in the Caribbean. Of course, they still have devotions in Jamaica and in many places in the Caribbean. You still, just before school, you have devotion. You have devotion or religious reflections or whatever it's called. But of course, I said to you, it's anti-feminist. It's not inclusive, in a sense. Of course, there are those. I mean, you can adjust the statement. You can still promote God. You can still. I mean, does it affect your Christianity if the statement was inclusive? That I mean, make God known. Does it? I mean, does it affect? That is for a discussion for another day. But I don't want to delve on this particular issue and looking at feminism and so on. But of course, the ultra feminist would say otherwise. You just see God as just mother, probably. All right, so let's move from this idea of feminism, and let's go into looking at socio-political and fascism. I'm going to revisit this topic of feminism, and of course, Jamaica Theological Seminary is an evangelical school. Okay. And of course, earlier we talk about, when you think about early writings, it was written, the Bible, by the time oral tradition was met with written, what was happening? Man was already establishing themselves. And of course, already writing scriptures and writing within a very male chauvinist way. Yes? Within and so what we have in scripture, but some people think it's a scripture tainted by man who has privileged himself and see God as man, and so on and so forth. Okay. And there are those who think, and of course there are those who think otherwise. But I am just sharing that with you. Now let's go beyond that. Let's now look at the issue of socio-political. Talking about the socio-political view of anything. And the issue of nationalism. When we talk about nationalism, by the way, I need to raise an issue about, if I can find that here. There's a difference when we talk about, some time ago, I talked about the issue of fascism. And I want you to know that fascism is a far right. It's not nationalism. There's a difference between fascism and nationalism. Nationalism is a promotion of the nation, the promotion of sovereign states with sovereign rights as against and freed people, and usually they are pro-communist or Marxist in a sense, talking about which promotes the equality and so on and so on. Nationalists, feminists, they're always talking about equality and so on and so forth. But fascism is a far-right authoritarian, ultra-nationalist political ideology and movement characterized by a dictatorial leader such as Vladimir Putin, in a sense. Some people thought that Fidel Castro was a fascist. Stalin, Hitler, of course we say Fidel Castro. I don't know if in Jamaica there was any fascist. But we talk about fascism, far right, authoritarian, far right as against far left. Far right, conservative, authoritarian, ultra-nationalist political ideology and movement characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, the word autocracy, autocrat, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, belief in a natural social hierarchy. Say, for example, you talk about the issue of white supremacy. You talk about, some kind of hierarchy. Talk about the Aryan race. And you talk about in the US, they were practicing replacement ideology, getting rid of black people. And they were afraid that the minority was going to be the majority in the US, the kind of majority that they have in Jamaica. What people were afraid. I used to work at a research company here in the US when I just came here at Schulman, Ronca, and Bucolvalis Inc. And we were doing research. And one of the research we did was looking at whether or not Americans had fears. Some Americans had fears that by 2020 to 2025, the majority will be part of the minority will be part of the majority. We're talking about racially, demographically, in terms of racial makeup, okay? Of course, the racial makeup of the US is predominantly white. What's the racial makeup of Jamaica? Predominantly black. In Trinidad and Tobago, there's a mix between Indians and so on and so forth. A small Jewish, a small white race in Jamaica, very few, probably less than 1%. In the US, the dominant race, and most European and Scandinavian countries, and the wealthier countries, the dominant race is white. In the wealthier countries, European, the former masters, the predominant race is white. Okay. But the poorer countries and the countries that's more corrupt and so on, the predominant race is black. Of course, there were fears in the US that the US was going to become, the dominant race was going to be colored people. In other words, white people will become part of the minority between 2020 and 2025. It was that fear that many politicians were using, such as Donald Trump. And people think that Trumpism is a new kind of fascism. Okay, appealing to this ideology, to the white supremacy, to this ideology that the white race is no longer going to be part of the dominant race. So the question is, what will America look like? And so, will it look like a third world country? Sorry, we don't use that language. Will it look like a global south country? Will it look like a country that is predominant, where racially it is the dominant is colored or black people? Will it look like per se Jamaica? Yeah, will it look like a global south country? and not just look like? Will the realities be like those countries? So were those were the fears, okay? And who will be? And in terms of and then of course you start am I willing to give up my privilege? What privilege are we talking about? Is it class privilege? Is it racial privilege? Depending on what, okay. Especially that some people are afraid to give up the queen because they're afraid of giving up certain privileges that they have in society. So when we talk about fascism, it is a belief in a natural social hierarchy, subordination of individual interests for the perceived good of the nation and race, and strong regimentation of society and the economy. And that's what fascism speaks. The issue of fascism speaks to that. And it uses language of nationalism, but in a sense, fascism is an extreme and ultra nationalist political ideology and movement, an ultra nationalist political ideology and movement. Again, characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, military, and so on and so forth. That is different, okay, from the nationalism that we are talking about and that we have spent some time to look at. Nationalism does not promote any race over any other race. And that is important when we talk about when we delineate between the two. And so when we talk about when you start to study societies, of course you want to look at is it a fascist society? What kind of society is it? Now the next thing is the issue of socio-political. When we talk about socio-political, what are we talking about? When we talk about socio-political, what are we talking about? And this is very important. And when we talk about socio-political, it's a marriage of two words. It's a marriage of social, of course, and political. And of course, we talk about koinonia. The word koinonia is a Greek word that speaks to commonality, communion. Talk about social, we're talking about commonality. That was always the word social. And I think in about 1880, something in the 1880s, it became associated with a more social science kind of within the social science, companion, ally, associate, fellow, so on and so forth. When you talk about social, talk about companion, talk about social, talk about ally, talk about social, talk about associate, or talking about a fellow. That was always the understanding of social. And of course, it became an issue. It became part of sociology. It became the realm of sociology, studying societies, in society, studying cultures, the way of life of people. Now we say that life is about people and how people relate. Life is about people and how people relate. Okay, and that and how you relate. Life is about people and how you relate, and that is a part of studying society. That's a part of the socio-political. Okay, how the dynamics of people in society. How does the society relate? How is it set up, and in whose interest? Then you start to think about that now, the social. Okay. Now, when you talk about the political, you're talking about socio-political is usually interdisciplinary. It's an interdisciplinary field which concerns itself with how government and how society interacts and influence one another. Okay, again, socio-political. When we talk about the socio-political, socio-political economy of anything. It's an interdisciplinary concept within the interdisciplinary field of study which concerns itself with exploring how government and society interact and influence one another. And that's very important. How do they interact with each other? And so any study of the social and the political, the social and the political. And by the way, when you start looking at the word political pertaining to civil affairs of government. Political pertains to what? The civil affairs of government. And in Latin, it comes to us in Latin meaning politicus, of citizens or state, taking sides in political politics. But of course, when you start to study politics, you have to look at in Western civilization, you look at Aristotle. Aristotle politics, where he said that an animal is intended to live in a city, to live in a city as a social animal, But of course, the kind of social animal that human beings are is that we are an intelligent social animal. We're intelligent beings. And if you look at, of course, before Aristotle, there was Plato. And if you read Plato's Republic, and of course, before Plato, you have Socrates. And Plato talks about, looks at the perfect society, looks at the Plato's Republic, looks at a society that is organized in terms of, in a sense, in a kind of divided and hierarchical way, but people based in their own positions, based on their skills, their talents, determined by a certain value. And in a sense, Plato moved from the understanding of the warrior king to know the philosopher as king. And then later we talk about to the savior, talk about the hero savior in Christianity. Each of those tropes plays a very important role. When you think about tropes, you think about tropes, you think about themes or images that latches on, or themes or ideas that latches on to general theologies or theories or philosophies in life. So we're talking about the post-socio-political. Talk about, okay, we are social beings. Yes, life is about people and how people relate. We talk about that. Life is about people and how people relate. But I have said that this meaning of social involves companion, ally, associate, fellow. We exist, we're social animals. But what differentiates us from other animals is that, according to Aristotle, we are what? We are intended to live in a city. We are a social animal, yes, but we have civil affairs pertaining to governance. So, of course, you talk about Aristotle, then, of course, there's David Hume in 1779. 1749 talks about the political prisoner. But the idea of politics is very important to the idea of the social. The idea of the social. So in as much as we are social, we are also political in terms of how we are organized in a civilized way through a governance, through a system of governance. But of course, a system of governance that also is tainted by certain privilege, depending on whatever ideology of the day that has win the conversation, okay? Whether through force or through a history that create a system that maintains the status quo. That's a very important point. But moving right along, okay, so the socio-political. So now that we have established that, the socio-political, I want to go and quickly look at a very important issue here in this lecture as we think about Caribbean thought and where we're going with it. I want us to trace and Caribbean thought, its concepts and meanings and language. Some time ago, there was, let me share my screen because I'm looking at tracing Caribbean thought. And I'm going to bring my screen quickly so you can see what I am doing. We'll talk, okay, Caribbean thought. Good. No, but let's trace Caribbean thought real quickly. We said 1492, 1493, Columbus discovered, came to the Caribbean. Why was Christopher Columbus in the Caribbean? What was his ulterior motive? Was it for gold? Was it for profit? Was it for greed? Was it international competition? Was it capital? Was it, but that's the coming of Christopher Columbus, and he was said to have discovered the Caribbean or Jamaica, parts of the Caribbean or Jamaica. But of course, that was really not true, but in a sense it is true when you look at pragmatic, when you study truth, the coherent theory of truth, the correspondence theory of truth, okay? What kind of truth do we subscribe to in the Caribbean? But in the US, it's the pragmatic theory of truth. If I say it's raining, even if it's not about what is actually happening, it's okay. It's all about the effect, the effect of that reality. So you go, if I say it's raining, and you go outside, and it's not really raining, but you say no, it's raining because it is a truth that is relevant to me, that is pragmatic to me, pragmatic truth. Okay, but. So when I talk about pragmatic truth, the real people that existed in the 1400s, if you weren't Europe, if it was not founded by a European, if it were not discovered by the European, it was not discovered at all. Of course, when we talk about standards and so on, and when you start to develop systems and standards some systems and standards are at times created to keep people out and to maintain a particular narrative. Christopher Columbus discovered Jamaica and parts of the Americas and parts of the Caribbean in the 1400s because we said, no, he never discovered. Yes, he did. If you understand pragmatic truth. Pragmatic truth. In terms of, because we talk about, when you study logic, when you start to look at common sense, science, and reason, when you start to look at reason, how you reason things. Did Christopher Columbus discover Jamaica? What's the answer? Did he discover the Americas? And many of you, I'm not sure what many of you, okay, fine, I'm going to ask a question. let's do a poll. I don't need to do a poll, actually, but I like doing polls. I'm gonna ask a question, and so let's go to the next. Discovery by Columbus. Okay, all right, let us save this. Okay, I have a question for you guys. Oh, I am ending this poll, and I'm doing the next, I am launching another poll. The poll is, by the way, the question, discovered by Columbus. Columbus discovered Jamaica in 1492. Yes or no? Columbus discovered Jamaica and the Americas in 1492. Yes or no? Okay, what time is it? It is 8:47. It's about to be 9 o'clock. We are going to take a break, and then we're going to discuss. I said, remember, there is pragmatic truth. Let me stop saying. Let me not say anymore. We're going to take a quick break. Of course, you answered the question, but I'm going to ask you why. To be prepared to answer, to respond. I need some new people to respond. I want to know why you answered the way you did. Okay, why you answered the way you did? Okay, so far only 5 persons have answered. Okay, so please answer the question: Columbus discovered Jamaica in 1492. Yes or no? And of course we're saying that what was his motive? What was the motive? He said he went to spread Christianity. He went to spread Christianity. Okay. Columbus went to spread Christianity. So already, of course, they're saying so the religions that these people is having in these other places weren't real religions. Of course, there is this. The religion that we have is a religion of privilege, of course. So, okay, but they went to promote Christianity, but of course wiped out a whole set of people in some places. There was genocide. Right now, I ask you the question: where are the Taino people in Jamaica and in parts of the Caribbean? I was speaking with somebody from, where was it? I don't know, it was Antigua or some Caribbean island. And there, in some Caribbean islands, there are still native Indians there. But in Jamaica, they're all but wiped out. And of course, in 1655, Jamaica became a British colony. Jamaica became a British colony. There was and how did Jamaica become a British colony, and of course not only Jamaica, but even in the US became a colony of Britain. Okay, there were many other countries, you know, there was war, of course, there was war in Europe at the time. And of course, you know that Britain or England defeated Spain and took over several countries, you know, several countries in the Caribbean, made several advances. And right after that, you had the sugar plantation. Why is it that Spain lost control of the US and so many of these countries in the 1600s? Why? That's quite interesting. I have an answer. If we have time to get to it, I will give it to you. I have an answer for that today. Then of course, the maroons in Jamaica have maroons, and there are other Caribbean islands that have maroons. Talk about heroes and the maroons, Paul Bogle, Nanny of the Maroons, so on and so forth. How did the maroons come to be? How did they come to be? They might be maroon people who are maroons in our class today. I'm not sure. And of course, you have to go back to 1655. And of course, you have the abolition movement, and of course you have plantation, the plantation society. I mean, the coming of the Africans, and then the coming of the sugar plantation society marked the slave trade. When you start to study sugar plantation, you are studying. You cannot study sugar plantation society without studying. Okay, before sugar in the Caribbean, there was no triangular trade. There was no trade. Okay, but so sugar marked that system, that the trade, the slave trade. Sugar, this capitalist drive, again, this greed marked the whole colonization, the kind of colonization we're talking about here in the 1600s and beyond. Coupled with that is this greed, this competition between the European countries or their elites. And there is global elitism and there is a nationalist elitism. There is, especially in this 21st century, of where we have globalization and where countries are connected now. Elites are now connected. So instead of you have a national idea of elitism. There's also a global elitism. But anyways, you find the sugar plantation coupled with sugar is the slave trade. And then of course, there is this fight for freedom to end slavery. And of course, you have the abolition. And of course, there is emancipation, and then there's abolition. Emancipation, because slavery was emancipated. Slavery was abolished, but it wasn't until 30 or 25 years later that the Emancipation Proclamation actually arrived in the Caribbean. After slavery was abolished in 1833, it wasn't until 1865 that we got the Emancipation Proclamation. Why did it take so long? Well, thank God for social media today. If I had social media, of course, that wouldn't have. But why did it? But it's 25 years. Why? You start thinking, okay, because many of these, it was kept from many of these countries in the Caribbean because they were not ready. They have to be ready. So okay, after the emancipation, it took them 25 years to establish a system where they could start what is known as the servitude and the indentured labor from China and India. That's how you get okay. Because they knew what was going to happen. As soon as you got independence, the slaves were going to leave the plantation. That's exactly what happened. They left. And many of them were unwilling to come back to work for wages. In the Caribbean, they went, okay, in the US, it was a little bit different in some cases. And many of them went back to work for pittance. In the Caribbean, many of them didn't go back. They went and had, because of, the agriculture and so on and so forth, because of the geography of many of these of the Caribbean, especially if it's cold time, when slavery was abolished in the U.S. In the Caribbean, it's a tropical weather, so it's easy. Of course, so it's easier for the slaves not to go back. It's easier, the kind of society and the weather climate in the U.S. Slavery was abolished, okay, long after the Caribbean, but of course it's because the U.S. got independent from Britain in 1776, following the war in 1775 from Britain, okay. So of course the Emancipation Proclamation didn't extend to them, to the U.S., to us here in the U.S., okay, but and so there was slavery in the U.S. long after the Caribbean. And some Caribbean people could come to the U.S. as freed slaves. And even many slaves here in the U.S. fled. One of the places that they went to was in the Caribbean. So there were slaves today that live in Jamaica that are not originally from Africa. Some of them come from the U.S. Well, okay, many of them fled the U.S. and ended up in Jamaica and the Caribbean. What about, okay, when we think about Caribbean slaves, we always think about many of them coming, blacks, many of them coming. What about, please remember, many of the slaves here in the U.S. wanted freedom. And so many of them, some of them, they were just African for Africa. Many of them wanted to go back to Africa, but some people also ended up in the Caribbean as well. And today you find a lot of Jamaicans live in Ghana. I discovered Caribbean people live in Ghana, Ethiopia, and so on, stemming from what happened in the 1920s, 30s, and so on, and even from the late 1800s. Okay, but the Emancipation Proclamation took 25 years or so to come to the Caribbean. But it was, I believe, that it was deliberately delayed, because the Caribbean would the Caribbean people, slaves, once they got that emancipation, they would not have, then who would work the land? Who is going to work the land? And in a sense, it was a way to pay back the debt. When they got it's quite interesting. When they got independence, when slavery was abolished in the Caribbean and the slaves left the plantation, the question is, okay, the plantocrats, the owners of the plantations in the Caribbean, they didn't live in the Caribbean. They lived in England, okay, or in Europe, or in France, okay. And just if you go to Saint Lucia, they were first occupied by the French, and then later by the British. So that's why the patois that they speak is kind of broken French. Okay, and many of the old people in St. Lucia today, I went to St. Lucia some time ago, and they speak French, broken French in a sense. They kind of patois that is French like. Okay, but the official language is in a sense English, because the English invaded and defeated the French. Just so you know. So this is important. We talk about Haiti. Haiti became the first colony that got independence. Black colony, black country in the Caribbean that got independence. from the Europeans. But their independence or freedom was not recognized because, it was not recognized because it would have sent a message to Black people and to other peoples and so on and so forth. And so they turned around, and so they were forced to pay 94 billion, 24 billion, whatever the number was. They were forced to pay billions of dollars in order for their independence or their freedoms to be recognized, and also as a way to repay back monies that the plantocrats, the owners, the slave owners and landowners in Haiti, it was also a way to pay back a debt from the loss of the land. The owners of this land, many of the owners of the land, the people who own the land in Haiti, they lost the land. And so they filed a claim against the crown. And the crown and France said, okay, we'll give you back your money. At the time, it wasn't the crown, I believe. Okay, we'll give you back the money. We'll give you back your money. Okay? But, so they gave them back their money, but who paid the debt? Haiti. Who covered, okay, so the crown or the French government, they paid back the owners and so on. But Haiti paid the French. So what happened in the Caribbean is, in a sense exactly what happened in the Caribbean. Is where you find that in 1833, when we got the Emancipation, they said, well, the owners in England said, we are going to lose land. Okay, sorry, they never lost land. They never lost land. In Haiti they did. In Jamaica they did not lose land. Okay, they did not lose land. What happened to all the land? They didn't lose land. The slaves left the plantation. That's what would have happened. They would have left the plantation. Who's going to pay me back for my loss? So they deliberately delayed the document. I mean, the emancipation. It was delayed for 25 years. They didn't get it till 1865. So two things happened. One, the slaves continued to work. They were freed, but they worked for 25 years after they were freed. Did the slaves in the Caribbean get back that 25 years of hard labor that they did? We talk about reparation. When we think about reparation, we think about slavery in general. But even when they became free in 1833, when they left, I mean, they were freed they were free in 1833. So in a sense, the slaves could have filed a grievance or a claim, but against the government of Jamaica or the Caribbean at the time, when they got independence, because for 25 years they were there working when they were already freed people. So they could have filed a claim, but I believe that even up to today, they could have filed a claim for that. But okay, they could claim they were free in 8, but they continued to work because there was nobody to. So they were freed men, but they weren't compensated. The slaves weren't compensated. No one is talking about that. In 1833, the slaves in the Caribbean, in the British Caribbean, were free, but they continued to work until 1865. So, okay, even if we don't believe in reparation, the slaves were working for 25 years as free people without pittance, without compensation. Were they ever compensated? No, they were never compensated, even up to this day. But okay, so in a sense, because the crown had to pay back the plantocracy, the owners, for losing those land and those slaves. They had to pay them back. And they filed, and of course, many of them filed insurance. So yes, many of them, so in a sense, they were paid back their monies for their losses. But the Caribbean people, the people in the Caribbean, the Africans in the Caribbean now, who work for 25. So in a sense, how were they paid back? How were they paid back the money? They said, well, fine. The Africans worked for 25 years. The slaves worked for 25 years. So in a sense, the slaves covered the liability, and then they later got indentured laborers. They worked with negotiations or whatever. They worked between China, India, whatever, and they worked the negotiation between China and India. And by this time, Europe was in China and India. Of course, Hong Kong was a colony of England. Okay, India. You look at India. India was colonized by England. Okay, England was colonized by India in a sense, and even in English today, England. If you see how the Indians behave, this kind of Britishness, and they have a caste system, yes, but there is also this kind of Britishness. The higher you are, the higher caste depending on where you are in the caste system. Okay, the higher caste that you are in, the dominant caste or the higher caste, then you will speak a kind of English that is British, and your education will be kind of British. In a sense, Caribbean has that kind of, former colonized countries, you find the kind of the kind of system that they have, based on how you speak. Your command of the English language determines the level of education you have, and also determines your access to opportunities and so on and so forth, and your class in Caribbean society. And of course, you have the coming of the Jews. In the Caribbean, you had the coming of the the coming of the Jews, black work for, and then of course black work for wages, war, and then later on you have war and anti-imperialism, Marxism in the 1940s, nationalism, national ideology, 1940s to 1955. Of course, you know that Frantz Fanon wrote the book Wretched of the Earth in 1961, 1959. He was traveling to Algeria or Libya, so to speak. And then by 1960s, you have independence and short-term prosperity, which is that Jamaica was one of Jamaica's growth was growth in the Caribbean and Jamaica rivaled that of Singapore's in the 1960s. Okay, it rivaled that of Jamaica. So you have independence by the 1960s. So there was this national movement in the 1940s. Okay, and by the way, in the 1930s, in terms of talk about how did World War I and World War II affect the Caribbean, but of course by then we were independent. We were still part of Britain. We were still part of British rule. Okay, but of course you find that black people had to work for wages, and in the 1930s it was the depressed years. It was very depressive for Jamaica as well, not just in the US and in the world, but even in Jamaica. And you have by the 1940s there was the rebuilding of the world and war and imperialism and capitalism. Independence by the 1960s. By the 1970s, you have the oil crisis. In the 1970s, the OPEC oil crisis, where the oil-producing energy countries cut the oil production, which drive up the cost of oil. And because Jamaica was in a spending spree in the 1960s and did not spend, they weren't fiscally sound. Promoted an economic policy of yes, social welfare, but that was devoid of developing developing Jamaica's capabilities. And so by the time the 1970s, we never had no windfall. All the windfall from bauxite, because bauxite was booming in the 1950s, Jamaica was growing, and so on and so forth. All that money, but of course, part of it was a lot of the wealth was concentrated in the top 1 or 2%, the brown majority in Jamaica, or the white majority in Jamaica, and so on. And so there was also this social policy of social welfare by the Bustamante government, and by extension Norman Manley government and the Manley government. 1970s, by the time the crisis appeared in the 1970s, Jamaicans and a lot of Caribbean countries and former colonies never had money. They never had any money left. So what they did was to start to borrow money from the World Bank and the IMF and so on and so forth. And these were and the money that they, and when you borrow money, of course, there's going to be conditions. They were met with conditions, stiff conditions, which also meant breaking down barriers, deunionizing, limiting investments in the local manufacturing sector, open up borders, getting rid of tariffs, devaluing your currency or your exchange rate to make it less competitive, so on and so forth. So those are some of the which affected Jamaica and many Caribbean countries in the long run. Singapore also Singapore never had to implement or apply all those restrictions. Okay. By the way, of course in the 1950s, you did have mass migration to Europe. In terms of what was going on in the 40s and the 50s and the fight for nationalism and so on and so forth, which from the 1940s all the way up to the 80s, Jamaica, there is, but there was the violence in the 1980s was beyond none. Okay, but by the 1960s, of course, in the 1950s there was this talk about the Caribbean becoming a federation. But I talk about this nationalist drive for this selfish. There's something, and that's one of my criticism of nationalism. Nationalism, there's a way where nationalism can get in the way. It can morph into ultra nationalism called fascism, okay, or a kind of selfishness, okay, which affects regionalism that is needed, okay, by small countries coming out of colonization, that needed in order to compete in the world, okay. Little did we know that the 70s was going to happen. So, Jamaica and the Caribbean needed a union, a strong union, but instead the selfish desires many Caribbean countries blame Jamaica. Jamaica is one of the countries that pulled out of the federation because many of the Caribbean countries could not agree as to, in terms of how to share power, how to coexist, where would the capital be, so on and so forth. So in the 1950s, the talk broke down, and many people, blame Jamaica, many Caribbean islands today, Trinidad and blame, and of course Trinidad also. There was also some people blame Trinidad, but many people blame Jamaica and some of the many the talks fell down. The talks about this Caribbean, and so by the 1960s, you find countries were getting independence. Everybody wanted power, their own nation, the pride of the nation. There was this pride of the nation. You get independence, but small nations, could we cope with what was about to happen with globalization opening up and so on? But there's some of the conversations that we have to have. And of course, by the 1970s and 80s, there was also, you have Castro and this talk of, there is still this drive for nationalism. The CIA invasion of the CIA invasion. By the way, there's a mass migration in the 70s because people thought that Jamaica was becoming a communist country. Okay. And everybody remember what happened with Stalin and Lenin and in the 1940s, and 1920s and 30s and so on. Everybody thought 1940s. Everybody thought Jamaica was going to become a socialist country. So there was in the 1970s there was a migration. People thought that Michael Manley was turning the country into a socialist country. Okay, and many of the wealthy people left Jamaica as well. A lot of the wealth left in the 1970s too. That also affected Jamaica. A lot of the wealthy and business people left. In the 1980s, you have the Grenada, the Revolutionary Army, and the demise of Bishop, and of course Castro in Cuba. Those people were very important when you talk about Caribbean figures. And of course, in the 1970s to 2019, in the 1970s, there was also this drive for remittances. And when we talk about Caribbean countries, the countries overseas depend heavily on remittances. When you talk about one of the main earners of foreign exchange in the Caribbean is remittances. Talk about tourism and remittances. Remittances is very important. So especially so when I say what's happening economically in the US and in many of these first world countries, is very important in terms of what it's very important to Jamaica and many Caribbean islands, many Caribbean countries, because the issue of remittance is very important. People overseas sending money to their loved ones is also another way in which the Caribbean has helped to survive and to withstand the shortfall, the lack, the challenges of this economic lack and economic challenges. Okay, it's very important when you look at the GDP and look at remittance, the contributions of remittance to GDP. Millions of Jamaicans overseas and Caribbean people overseas contribute millions of dollars to the Caribbean, to their loved ones. I have said that it is haphazard. The way if you look at the remittances and over COVID, during COVID, it kind of lapsed a bit, but it's back up. But remittance is very important. And when you look at the GDP and look at Jamaica's foreign exchange earners, the biggest foreign exchange earners, it's not just tourism, it's also remittances. Remittances is in the top 4 in terms of highest foreign exchange earners. Now, remittance is very important. Jamaica, when we talk about foreign exchange is important in terms of in order for trade. In order for Jamaica to trade, we need US dollars to trade. And Jamaica have to spend, it costs Jamaica a lot of money for $1 US dollar. Okay. So, okay, but today what you have, by the way, what you have, just so you know, people are actively trying to replace the US dollar as the main currency in the world. Today, the main currency in the world today, when you talk about when people want to measure their exchange rate, measure the value of their exchange rate, the value of their rate, the value of their currency. When you want to measure the value of a currency, you measure it against the dominant rate. Okay. The world's currency is actually the US dollar. The US dollar is not the strongest, but it is the most exchanged currency. Okay. The most recognized currency today. All right, but it has a lot of reputation. But China and Brazil and Russia wants to limit America's dominance and freedom in the world. Some time ago in a lecture, I asked you, who rules the world? The book Who Rules America by G. William Domhoff. And Ross Perot wrote the book Organizing America, looking at the corporation as the most dominant feature in American life, with their multinational and transnational, not just in the US, but even in the Caribbean, even in the hotel industry. Look at what's going on with the hotel industry and beaches in Jamaica and the Caribbean, especially in Jamaica, and the issue of privatization. The issue of privatization is one of the challenges in the Caribbean, where many of, after Caribbean, property is very important. Property. We talk about creating generational wealth. One of the problems with Black people is that Black people lack generational wealth, and they lack generational wealth because their lands were stolen from them, their labor, their wealth was stolen from them. Okay, and even after independence and they were free, they continued working. Even that money was stolen from them, and they work pittance and they are struck. Okay, they don't have generational wealth. They don't have land per se. In Caribbean, it's a little bit different. The Caribbean people, they have land. A lot of Caribbean people, but a lot of Caribbean people don't. A lot of Caribbean people don't have land. But okay, but then the value of. But if you do have land, they devalue that land, the property. If you do have land, it is devalued. Okay, Say, for example, international appraisal system follows an international system that devalues it and values it. International appraisal system follows American appraisal system. An appraisal system that devalues Black or colored property. That's the de jure factor. That's how, talk about how slavery, how discrimination, or how slavery continues in the world today, or discrimination. You have de facto factors and you have de jure factors. That's very important when you start to study systemic racism or discrimination. We talk about de facto factors and de jure factors. Okay, we talk about de jure factors as against de facto factors. Okay, de jure factors is systematic. Okay, de facto factors is entrenched. It's behavior. Okay, how does its behavior? So this is very important to the to the conversation of remittance. So we talk about remittances and the exchange rate. Oh, sorry, I almost went off a tangent. So Brazil and China today are trying to replace. So who rules America? But today I said it's not about who rules America or who rules the Caribbean, but who rules corporations. And I say to you, what is in corporations' special interest? Their bottom line. When we talk about someone's bottom line, we're talking about profit. Yes? What is the bottom line of we're talking about the bottom. When we talk about the bottom line, what is your bottom line? Okay? Talking about monetary value, profit. The bottom line is to make money. They want to make money. Capital wants to make money. It's to maximize profit and to minimize costs. That's what capital is about. Okay, making money, profit. That's what when we talk about Christopher Columbus' ulterior motive. What was his ulterior motive? Okay, he said it was to spread religion, but that was not the ulterior motive. The ulterior motive was for profit, for gold. They were looking for gold, and they ended up in the Caribbean, in the West Indies, instead of the East Indies, in East India. They were looking for gold, okay? But they were somewhere in the Caribbean. In a sense, he buck upon the Caribbean. The Caribbean was the Americas was a discovery by chance, or was a discovery by chance. By the way, Christopher Columbus opened it up. I said that. When I go back to Christopher Columbus, remind me that I said that. Christopher Columbus opened it up. There's a particular reason, okay? Opened it up. Very important. Christopher Columbus opened it up. Very important. Remind me that I say that. I have to, when I talk about Christopher Columbus again, remind me that I said that Christopher Columbus did what? He opened it up. Very important. Christopher Columbus opened it up. Very important. So corporations exist but corporations want to make money. And they go where they can make the most money. Okay? They go where they can make the most money. Or they take advantage of where they can make the most money. Now, the US is the most dominant country in the world today, we say, ruled by corporations or multinationals. The multinationals are the bottom line. They exist for greed. Listen to this. If multinationals rules America and their bottom line is to make money, greed, nepotism, neocapitalism, greed, they want to make money, then it means that they will do anything to make money. China understands that. Russia understands that. And so today, they are using that understanding to manipulate. They are using that understanding to control America. America is said to be the most dominant country in the world today. terms of their military might, in terms of economics. They are one of the most dominant countries in the world. They are the most dominant country in a sense. Although leadership up from the center is softening, there's no really one dominant country as such per se anymore. Okay, but still, America is still considered, and in terms of its wealth, in terms of its military prowess in the world, its advances, America is still one of the most, or the most dominant countries in the world. Okay, and however, there are those who want to challenge American dominance in the world, China and Russia. And one of the ways that they are doing, they are using strategy, and they have used many different ways. One of the ways that they have done, one of the things that they have done is to they understand, is to study American politics, and they understand American greed. So what China has been doing over the years is that they have been developing their country, Russia developing their countries, North Korea developing their countries, so that their countries, which are totalitarian countries in a sense, not necessarily communist, they are pseudo-communist, they're not real Marxist countries. But what they have done is that they have developed their economies in a sense. They have utilized a form of capitalism in a sense. And by the way, I heard that Vietnam is doing very well today. Vietnam is doing, and they have what is known as, it's still a Marxist country, but but they use Marxism in a creative way. But if you read people like Trotsky, even Marx himself understood that, and even Lenin, even these many people many communists believe and will argue that you need to have capitalism is one step in communism. Capitalism is a step in communism. You have to have some amount of wealth. You have to have some amount of profit. And okay, or you have to have some amount of competition, because competition will help to spur on production, which help to create wealth. So you have to have some amount, and capitalism is a very good way of doing so. But what they have been doing over the years is that they have created a kind of wealth class, position their citizens in a way to be able to buy and to produce, yes, and to make them into customers. They have turned their citizens into consumers, people who can buy American stuff, people who can vote with their dollar. They have developed their countries with some amount of wealth, some amount of an economy that can buy now, that can contribute as consumers. They aren't okay. And by the way, the Philippines and Vietnam today, a lot of multinationals and business, a lot of American corporations are seriously investing in Vietnam today. They are racing to invest in Vietnam because Vietnam seems to be the next. There's something happening in Vietnam. And Vietnam is not thinking about the kind of investment we're thinking about, sweatshops and fact. No. They're talking about a kind of digital science and digital technology, sophistication. Talk about people investing in the Caribbean. We want investment in the Caribbean. We're not talking about this tourism. We're not just talking about around the raw material. We're not just talking about agriculture. We're just talking about investing in Jamaica and the Caribbean that makes Jamaica that creates Jamaica into kind of a sweatshop with sweatshop conditions. Okay? Like the kind of investment with the free zone. Now we're talking about investment in Jamaica, technological investment, okay? Investments in financial technology and software, and in digital technology. We're talking about in certain capability, the kind of sophisticated investment, not an investment in investment in management and so on. Not investment that creates Jamaica in just servitude, an investment in just hospitality, and then you devalue the hospitality or the ability to maximize from that. That's what, okay. But in China, what China has done, China is smart, China and Russia, which is what the Caribbean needs to do. I said, as a Caribbean, they need to think strategically. Over the years, China and Russia and North Korea have been developing, and many of these countries have been developing the populace. That is what, education is important. Education is free in China. Education is a right. And these people are very educated, and when you look at the results of making education free, the result of having access to education, when you look at the kind of economy and the society and what they produce. And when you watch the film about corruption and how the kind of corruption, the corruption in education has affected Jamaica, which has held us back. Talk about but education is very important. Access to education. Look at many of the top countries, Finland and Denmark and many of these Scandinavian countries. Education, they have access to education. And it shows in terms of how they live, how they treat with issues, the kind of, they don't have, in terms of crime and violence, income inequality, poverty, and the products that are produced, so on and so forth. So when you talk about investment, so what China has been doing, they have been investing in they make education a right, and they created a wealth class, or a kind of population they have billions of people was in poverty. Now they have reduced poverty, and now and guess what? Now Chinese can buy stuff now, and now Americans are racing to China. The capitalists, the multinationals, the businessmen, the elites, they're rushing to China to make money, to sell their products, and so on. They're rushing to China to sell. Recently, there was this issue where there was a thing with China was trying to say that China was trying to interfere in a decision in American politics, or through basketball. Basketball had to apologize because NBA makes billions of dollars. HBO, the box office, they make billions of dollars from Chinese viewers. They don't want to lose. So that's the point I'm trying to make. They have been busy. China, Russia, they have been busy making their countries into a market. Caribbean, Mr. Andrew Holness, let us make the Caribbean, make Jamaica into a market where our people can buy, so that they can race to Jamaica. So, anyways, China understands that. So in a sense, China understands that, and guess what? China has a state-run economy. China is so smart, man. So they have a lot of control over consumer behavior. But the US have a lot of control over China. I mean, capitalist country claim to not, it's a free market. It's not a free market. Let me tell you, through interest rates. The Feds control interest rates. Bank of Jamaica controls interest rates. There is no free market. You raise interest rates, you lower interest rates, that affect behavior. So please, there is no, so they can control free. But anyway, in China, they have a lot of control. The difference between China and which with a state-run economy, and the US, or a country with a more free market economy, is that the country with the free market economy purports to be free, but they're not really free. They purport, they project, they provide a facade. While in China, they don't, and the communist countries, they don't purport. They give it to you like it is. They don't profess one thing and confess another. Yes, they don't purport to be free. They say we're not free, we're state planned. And that's how we operate. Okay, while in other countries that have a free market economy, or other countries with free market economy, they say they are free, but they're not really free. They have systems in place that controls human behavior. Okay, but China has, and Russia, they have no market. They turn their people into a market. So now talk about all these multinationals are invading our country. Fine, let's turn our people into people who can give them some wealth, turn them into, and so now of course China is a big country. They have the population of China. The population of China now that, oh, by the way, and Chinese government, they understand that. So now they no longer have a one-child policy in China. They don't. They understand that if you have a large population, that's strategy, that's key. Because you might be poor, but you have 1 billion people, a billion of people. One US dollar, one person in China spends $1 US. I mean, that's a lot of money in China, but you multiply that by 1 billion, they would have made $1 billion. You would have become a billionaire. But China understands that, and so they are challenging America. So in a sense, you can say that, well, that China, in a sense, is positioning themselves to and how will that affect the Caribbean? How will that affect China? How will China's challenge of Americans' dominance in the world today? How will that affect Caribbean? Have you thought about that? Now, and of course, there are people who want China to be down. In fact, right. I understand that China today is in the debt lending business. It's not just the World Bank that's lending money now. And I know that the Jamaican government has also engaged in terms of borrowing money from China, and there's some agreement, but China is now lending money to help struggling economies, and even Argentina, even middle income countries such as Argentina. Middle income, you have low income such as Haiti, and you have middle income such as Turkey and Argentina. They are lending money to those countries. China lending money to those countries. They're positioning themselves. And how will that affect Caribbean? The next point I wanted to raise is this, that we talk about currency, the dominant currency is the US dollar, but China and Brazil is challenging America's dominance. I heard recently that China and Brazil, either they are planning to or that they have ditched the US dollar, and now they are apparently using crypto. They're moving towards crypto. In fact, that was the plan. The plan was to move towards crypto. Listen, guys, there's a competition. There's competition happening in the world. There's a lot happening in the world today. There's a lot happening in the world today that we have to consider, that we have to think about as Caribbean. China and Brazil today just ditched. I understand it's planning to all have ditched or gotten rid of, jettison. The word jettison means to get rid of the US dollar, and now they are moving towards crypto. But that was always the plan, though. That was always, people were actively trying to replace US dominance by buying up crypto, and crypto was becoming dominant, and so on and so forth. And there's a fight happening in the world. Right, recently, there was crypto. There was a big thing with Bitcoin and crypto, how it collapsed. There was a collapse. A lot of money. People lost millions, huge sums of money. And part of that is occurring because of the interest rates. Okay, the raising interest rates, the mopping up of liquidity. People have less money now to put towards crypto. The US government, they are smart. They have a sense of what's going on. Okay, there is this fight to replace the US dollar as the most, okay, because there are people fighting against the US, while at the same time Russia is invading Ukraine. And we're understanding that there is now North Korea and South Korea. There is kind of a understanding between these two countries now. China and Russia, okay, are having talks. And it is quite interesting what's going on in the world today. While, of course, the Russia and NATO, they're talking, the Ukraine situation is creating an interesting situation. While at the same time, there is a fight in terms of digital technology, spyware and malware. But this Brazil and recently President Biden asked, Saudi Arabia to increase the production of oil, and he did a 160 instead of increasing it. He with Vladimir Putin, with OPEC, decided to cut oil production, thereby affecting oil, creating this instability in the world. What is going on in the world today? And how does that affect Caribbean? And how are we? Where are we? Who do we side with if we side with anyone? Kamala Harris? Sorry, I'm being provocative here. These are interesting times for the Caribbean and for the world. And of course, they just found Guyana, oil in Guyana. And I understand that Jamaica and other Caribbean countries have developed major interests in this. But these are interesting times, and you have to ask, what is happening? But the US is understand its position. I'm telling you, they understand their position and what China is trying to do and what Russia is trying to do. In the sense that today, crypto is struggling. And in a sense, they're using legislation, government and legislation to attack cryptocurrency and legal system to go after and to threaten and to frighten and to scare people. And also mopping up liquidity is a way to prevent extra monies in the economy from people from investing into crypto. It is not in America's interest for crypto to rise. It's not in America's interest for crypto to be successful, because there are those, because cryptocurrency and one of its main investments was Bitcoin, was a tool that was provided an opportunity for its opponents to develop dominance. Because here it is that China and Russia and Brazil, they had always wanted to do that. The plan was always to make cryptocurrency, and that was, I understand that's what the drive. They wanted cryptocurrency to be the number one currency, affecting American dominance and power in the world. But of course, there's always this countervalence. Okay, how did that affect Caribbean? And I said to you, that's why I'm teaching Caribbean thought, but we cannot just think in terms of Jamaica and in Caribbean. We have to think about what is happening in the world, and that's what has dogged us. Because when in the 1970s, when the oil crisis happened, where were the windfall? Jamaica was the pearl of the Caribbean, and many Caribbean islands had that name. Many Caribbean islands were developing, were growing in leaps and bounds. But today, and we were rivaling Singapore, but Singapore is way beyond the Caribbean today. And of course, there's the issue of, so the remittances is very important. And American policy is very important. The issue of Caribbean identity. By the way, as we talk about the issue of Caribbean identity, I asked you to do a poll. Wow, it's 9:44. It's 9:44. Is it 9:44 right now? And we finished class at 10? Oh, wow. And we were supposed to take a break? Yes.
8:44 here in Jamaica, sir.
Yes, sir. 8:44 in Jamaica.
In Jamaica.
Sorry, and we finished class at 9, and you finish at 9, correct? So you have,
yes, we have 16 minutes to go.
Oh my God. What? Wow. I cannot believe this. I did not know that. And I have not touched on, okay, let me just, okay, fine, that's okay. But there is, I wanted to raise an issue Actually, why did I stop sharing my screen? Okay, all right. Now, the issue of identity, and we talk about the issue of, I want to talk about the issue of identity as we trace Caribbean thought. Rex Nettleford wrote an academic journal entitled National Identity and Attitudes to Race in Jamaica. Again, national identity and attitudes to race in Jamaica. And in it, he said that the need for roots and the attendant quest for identity are said to be natural to people everywhere. I'm gonna need you guys to give me until 10:30 to finish the class, okay? If you don't mind. But listen to this. The need for roots and the attendant quest. Sorry, when I said 10:30, I mean American time, 9:30 Jamaican time. The need for roots and the attendant quest for identity are said to be natural to people everywhere. The phenomenon may be said to inhere in a people's desire to collate and codify their past collective experience, as well as to lay foundations for the realization of future aspirations. To lay foundations for the realization of future aspirations. New nations like Jamaica usually give large portions of their, and Jamaica, and or Black peoples of the Americas, give large portions of their creative energy to what may be termed the identity problem. And the mid-20th century, with its flux of emergent countries in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean, is particularly noted for this aspect of nation building. In Jamaica, a Caribbean country, which attained independence from Great Britain in August of 1962, the search for identity has been the focus of attention for some time. It is indeed difficult to determine what exactly is meant by the term the Jamaican identity. It is variously expressed as things Jamaican, or the Jamaican image, things Jamaican, or the Jamaican image. So what is Jamaican image? There are, however, ways of approaching the problem. And by the way, earlier I said to you, it is difficult to determine what exactly is meant by the term the Jamaican identity. When I talk about that, what am I talking about? After 307 years, I won't get into that yet. Let me continue. There are, however, ways to talk about the identity problem. The question, okay, and let me say that again. In Jamaica, a Caribbean country which attained independence from Great Britain in August of 1962, the search for identity has been the focus of attention for some time. It is indeed difficult to determine what exactly is meant by the term the Jamaican identity. Last week I asked the question, how many of you watch local streaming, local TV as against American TV or American media? Majority of you spend most of your media time watching American media. Media is an important socialization tool, especially in the 21st century. Media plays a very important role, and it shapes one's identity, or helps to, in a sense. The term the Jamaican identity is variously expressed as things Jamaican or the Jamaican image. There are, however, ways of approaching the problem. The question, what are we? The question, what are we? Entails the desire of what we want to be. Again, the question, what are we? Rex Nettleford here is saying that the need for roots and the attendant quest for identity are said to be natural to people everywhere. And it is said to inhere in people's desire to collate and codify their past collective experience, as well as to lay foundations for the realization of future aspirations. New nations usually give large portions of their creative energy to what may be termed the identity problem, and the mid-20th century with its flux of emergent countries in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean is particularly noted for this aspect of nation building. So I say to you that to determine what exactly is meant by the term Jamaican identity or Caribbean identity is difficult, and we have said that it is a difficult endeavor anyway. There are, however, ways of approaching the problem. The question of what we are entails the desire of what we want to be. But, you know, I like how the Rastafari put it. Rastafari, they end with the I. The question of what I, the question, what is I? Rex Nettleford never asked that question. I am putting it here. The question of what is I entails the desire of what I want to be. Outside of this general will. The question of what, but Rex Nettleford said, the question of what are we entails the desire. When you ask what are we, it entails a desire of what we want to be. And if we want to be, and if what we want to be, and if what we want to be must have any practical significance for Jamaica, there should be some concordance between the external conception of the island's over 2 million people on the one hand, and Jamaicans' own internal perception of themselves as a national entity on the other. Again, ways of approaching the problem. The question of what are we entails the desire of what we want to be. What is it that we want to be? So the question, what is it that you want to be? Also entails a desire. I mean that desire of what you want, that desire is part of the question of what we are. And there should be some concordance between the external conception of the island people on the one hand, and Jamaicans' own internal perception of themselves as a national entity on the other. But then, of course, there is the issue of the general will as against the individual will. And of course, those are some of the important things that you may have to consider as you think about, as we trace Caribbean thought. Okay, one of the things we look at is Caribbean identity, struggle, conquest, the schizophrenia, poverty and inequality. I didn't realize that the time was beyond us. And there's one, I want to make a point, 2 points before we end class today. I talk about the fact that my own experiences as a post-colonial man living in a post-colonial superpower country. I ask the question, what voice do I have? What voice do I have? Talk about what voice do I have, if any? What are the threats to that voice? And Fanon and his contemporaries have questioned whether Caribbean countries such as Jamaica are really free of external control and power. External control, and even in this issue of identity, Rex Nettleford talks about the external conception as against the external conception. And of course, what is I as against is determined by what I want to be. And the Rasta that says what the Rasta, Bob Marley said, we're not capital or Marxist, okay? His religion is in a religious consciousness of the I and I, okay? The I, the individual, of, but not in a selfishness, but a sense that of what he wants to be. Okay, but free of external control and power, and that this illusion of freedom comes from a dominant globalist world within which we find ourselves competing against two forces vying for control: the East versus the West. Marxist socialist ideology versus Adam Smith free market principle. However, we may view a Marxist way out, and most feminists, post-colonialists, whoever, Caribbean people, we may view a Marxist way out, given our past with the West and Western capitalist ideology, based on profit that ostracized us from our labor and profit and castigated us. A point here, and just a point here, I say to you that I am biased, and I'm using bias in this sense as a starting point or a hunch or hypothesis determined by a system of values which one approaches and seeks to understand social reality and the world and one's thoughts. Now, Charles Bates said to himself and other social scientists in discussions of Harlem Affairs, I found that there was no one without some bias, and that those who pretend to be most unbiased either were indifferent or reflected an insidious form of bias. Presuppositions drive research and thought and practice, and one must be aware of that. And Kenneth Clark alludes to that in the book Dark Ghetto. So when I asked you earlier, well, when we asked the question, to what extent has the resistance movement, such as Garveyism, civil rights movement, the abolitionist movement, to what extent the resistance movement, the independence movement, the drive for freedom, to what extent have we achieved actual success? To what extent have we achieved the resistance movement, the fight for freedom? What extent have we achieved actual success? It is determined by our ability to achieve actual power, to determine our own destiny and chart our own course, talking about who we want to be, to chart our own course and our own destiny. The extent to which the resistance movement has achieved actual success is determined by its actual ability to achieve actual power to determine its own destiny and chart its own course. I said Rex Nettleford talks about the question of what we want, who we are. It is determined by the desire of what we want to be. And who is it that, what is it that, okay, and we talk about the Pan-Africanism or the post-colonial movement or the civil rights movement or the drive for independence, talk about, so how have we achieved real success? The extent to which the resistance movement, civil rights and so on, has achieved actual success is determined by this issue of identity. It's also dealt with the ability to be able to determine one's identity outside of the external. So you said, okay, what is it you wanted to be? What is it the Caribbean wanted to do? Who is it that we wanted to become? We wanted the ability to achieve actual power. Sorry, we wanted the ability to determine our own destiny and chart our own course without outside interference. Outside of any nationalistic pride that foils that plan. We talk about regionalism versus nationalism. Regionalism I believe, was the way to go. But that drive for this nationalism, but there was a selfishness that crept in, a narcissism that crept in. Someone talk about narcissism that crept into this nationalism. The narcissism can become, we talk about extremes. They are extremes, even ultra Christianity. Talk about ultra Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, traditional Christianity, contemporary Christianity, the middle of the road, the right wing, left wing. What kind of Christianity does Caribbean or Caribbean, But we won't make the mistake of talking about a general Caribbean, because we have denominations in the Caribbean. Instead, and we also have schools of thought. But in a sense, we also wanted, outside of that, nothing is wrong with having that kind of competitive nation. But a nation that that is determined and destined by us, outside interference and strategy. But you will have that outside interference and strategy because of the competition that we find ourselves in the world. And so we have to think as though we are caught within a competitive cog, and we have to fight. And so therefore you have to develop strategy. So China and is developing strategy to bolster to their position in the world as against the US. On the other hand, there are those opportunists, corrupt locals, working to undermine nationalist thinking of the nation, rooted in humanist, socialist, Marxist, Foucauldian thinking. Foucault primarily focuses on the relationship between power and knowledge, and how they are used as a form of social control through societal institutions. The church is an institution. The Caribbean thought, yes, we will study institution. As apologists, we will have to understand this particular argument or reasoning. He was a post-structuralist who eschewed institutional thinking. And of course, when we talk about anthropologists, they study past and present behaviors, but more so the meaning behind them and how they evolve over time. The meaning behind them and how they evolve over time. So as we trace Caribbean thought and Caribbean in discourse, and you ask the question, what constitutes the Caribbean? Indeed, we say that it is a matter of context and perspective. Anglophones in the region usually think and mean the English-speaking islands of the members of the CARICOM. The wider CARICOM is at times meant to mean the others. There's also the Hispanic literature. There's El Caribe, which refers to the Spanish-speaking islands only. Scholars speaks about the socio-historical category, which refers to a cultural zone in the Caribbean. There are those who speak of that. And I want to share that screen. We're going to wrap up shortly. I didn't give you any break, and you guys have been going. Thank you for going with me. I'm wrapping up. So we talk about what constitutes the Caribbean, a matter of context and perspective. The wider Caribbean is at times meant to mean the others. We talk about Hispanic literature. We talk about the socio-historical category of Caribbean, which refers to a cultural zone characterized by the legacy of slavery and the plantation system. It embraces that the islands are part of the adjoining mainland and may be extended to include the Caribbean diaspora overseas. Organizationally, there's the CARICOM, which is expanded to include Suriname and Haiti. Talk about the Caribbean, we're talking about also in terms of language and identity, geography, history, culture, geopolitics, geoeconomics, or organizations. So when we talk about Caribbean, the geopolitical nature of the world today, geopolitical conditions of the world today, what's going on with China and Russia and the war in Ukraine and so on and so forth. That will affect the Caribbean and we have to understand geopolitical issues because of Jamaica's size and our vulnerability. It exposes us to exogenous shocks in the world, which affects Caribbean in a sense, and so that is very important. Is there a Caribbean identity? If so, what is it? Fidel Castro must have been acutely aware of this divisiveness and this implicit ethnic orientation of this current trend when he declared in 1976 that Cuba is a Latin African rather than a Latin American nation. And more recently, when he asserted that the Caribbean people of African origin are part of our America. So in 1999, Fidel Castro declared that in 1976 that Cuba is a Latin African rather than Latin American. Because he eschews anything American. Because American for him represents capitalism. A kind of capitalism that invades and plunder and privileges American over the local. And so, you know, Fidel Castro and many of the fighters of the Revolutionary Party, of Fidel Castro's Communist Party, they felt as though Americans had controlled the country and the locals were divorced. And that's exactly what happened. And they were divorced from their wealth and they were fighting to reclaim their country, fighting back. But in the end, fighting back for their country, fighting back for their independence, their wealth. And they fought and won against the US. But of course, that what usually happens is that what happened is that they level an embargo. This is how they levy an embargo that prevent Cuba from any kind of gains or wealth. To set an example, you said, okay, so they put an embargo on Cuba. So no country can trade with Cuba. No country can recognize Cuba's independence. This is how they put they dangled debt over Haiti so that no country would recognize their independence. Exactly what is happening in Cuba today. The embargo on Cuba. Why is there an embargo on Cuba? Is it reasonable? Or is it based in the competitive nature of the world today? Of course. They lost. The US lost Cuba, and so they levy an embargo. Is that the situation? France lost Haiti, and so they hold them. They hang the debt. They hang debt over them. They place a debt on them. Fidel Castro and Cuba, many Cubans, they associate themselves with that kind of African diasporan thinking. They consider themselves, we are of Latin African rather than Latin American. They use the word Latin African, which is very important. Of course, when we talk about larger islands of the Caribbean, we talk about these are more. I will share with this lecture with you, talk about larger island states, the 4 states in the Greater Antilles with a population of about 79 million, Jamaica, Cuba, Haiti, DR. The smaller states, island states, are 9 states, mainly eastern and southern, each with average population of 260,000. The mainland states are Suriname, Guyana, Belize, and of course, there are 12 dependent territories. In other words, the dependent territories are territories that they're part of the Caribbean, but they're not independent. Okay, so there are 12 dependent territories, and we have 3 mainline states: Suriname, Guyana, and Belize. Suriname, Guyana, and Belize. They are the mainline states of the Caribbean. Okay, just so and I'm deliberately going over this because I did an exam some time ago, and there was a question in the exam, and I think there were some examiners who examined the responses from the students, and one of the criticism was that some of the students did not understand the Caribbean. Their responses would suggest that they were confusing and mixing up the Caribbean and not understanding Caribbean and so on. So, but which I believe that should be that. Looking at the Caribbean in terms geographically, is something that all Caribbean people, as part of our understanding of all things, should understand. We're part of the Caribbean. We should have a sense of where we are in our position in the world today. We talk about Marxist nationalist view of the nation. Nationalists argue that we talk about the house slave mentality, created opportunities and set the stage, or maintain the power of the status quo. Oh, sorry, you know what? I didn't mean. I don't want to talk about that. Those are just lecture notes, which I had for the class today. I am going to stop right here. The next class, we will ask the question: where does this hope and drive for decolonization intersects with globalization? And I actually wanted to begin looking at. There were three concepts I was supposed to raise in class today. Looking at a brief overview of the socio-political context of the Caribbean and of Jamaica, nationalism and Garveyism, and Caribbean Fanonism. To be honest, I did not touch that. I'm not even going to begin that today. I will have to do that at the next class. But I had asked the question earlier, and let me see the results of the poll, and we're going to share the results of the poll. The question was, discovery by Columbus. Columbus discovered Jamaica in 1492. 5% of you said yes. Sorry, 45% of you said yes. 55% of you said no. And it said only 11 persons participated in this. And let me end it and share results. I'm sharing the results now, okay? Columbus discovered Jamaica. Majority of you said he did not discover Jamaica. Why did you guys say that Christopher Columbus did not discover Jamaica? Just one, if I could get one response. Why is it that you guys say that he did not discover Jamaica? Anybody?
Okay, sir. So a quick response from Alicia.
Yes.
My perspective is that first and foremost, if he had discovered, and discovered can be looked at from two perspectives. In his eyes, he discovered, I'm thinking that he would have discovered Jamaica if he had not known about Jamaica. And so discover for him would have been appropriate. But if he came and saw other persons on the island, then it would not been a discovery in a general context to say, because if it was discovered, then he would have been the first person, but that was not so. So we can't 100% say he did not discover. He discovered because probably this was new to him. So that would be my interpretation of him discovering.
Okay, but when people talk about he discovered it, in the books we even have a Christopher Columbus Day. So it's not for him. The whole world said that he discovered. It's in the books. Yes.
Yeah, the book says so because he says so, but then the reality is.
So a question is, do you guys believe? You guys say no. Why do you say that?
Because that is my thing.
No, yeah, but why? Why? Why you say he did not discover Jamaica?
Because he was not the first. Other persons were there. He was not the first.
Oh, so there were other people there. There were other people living on the island. But why is it that people today, that we still have it today, in even in mainstream education and academia, why is it that we still have it that he discovered? We even still have it in our discussions everywhere. He discovered Jamaica, the US, and many parts of the Caribbean. Let me respond. Of course, I mean, he did not discover Jamaica. For people who are in the Caribbean, because we know that there were other people, and in the US, there are other people living here before. But of course, if you want to keep something, you have to say you discover it. Okay, for keeps. All right, for keeps. If you want to keep something, I mean, you want to keep it. You're gonna. But of course, that's one of my. But outside of that, of course, it's very important for the actual discovery was you claim a land, you find a land, you would stick your flag into the soil, and that is your land. But of course, that if you capture the land, but discover the land, there were other people. Okay. And so in a sense, he said he discovered it instead of captured it. You notice? Christopher Columbus captured the US, the Americas, and captured. Why is it that we don't use the language? It was a capture, it was not a discovery. If it's a capture, then the people who own it can later on can make a claim to it. If the people who own it, they can get it back. Same with your labor. Your labor was stolen, but therefore the value, therefore whatever you work, you should be able to get it back if it were stolen. But so language, so okay, so the language, so that's why people talk about the mainstream. That people develop standard, it's not part of the standard. Because officially he discovered it, but unofficially he didn't. But can I tell you, officially he captured it in the reality, but the language is important. So society creates standards, creates institutions, creates systems to protect their ill-gotten gain, to change the narrative, and creates religion and rules to baptize stuff, to protect and to maintain what they have now. But so the issue is Christopher Columbus captured Jamaica, okay? And by extension, not just, he was acting on behalf of who? Who was he acting on behalf of? Huh? And if you talk about, you look at what's going on, I mean, many of the countries of the world, so, you know, acting on behalf of Italy, Spain. So Spain and Italy, they would have to pay. They would have to pay money, they have to give back money. Okay, talk about, so language is important. But the second thing that I want you to consider, Christopher is pragmatic truth. So of course, it is an issue of pragmatic truth. Pragmatically, he did talk about pragmatic truth, correspondence truth, and the coherent theory of truth. I am going to touch on that briefly when I start class next week. When you start to study theories of truth, there is a truth, an American truth, or a kind of truth that makes the statement that Christopher Columbus discovering the Jamaica and the Americas, although he kept true. Pragmatic truth is what is pragmatic, what is relevant, what is valuable to you, what advances, okay? That's it, okay? And when you start to study the world, unless it was not discovered by the privilege, it was not discovered at all. So the standards is the standard. What were the standards? What was, okay? When you talk world, a world did not exist outside of Europe. The map of the world was the map of Europe. The map of Western civilization was, or the map of the world was a map of Europe, or the dominant view. And if it is not part of the dominant view, then it does not exist. If it was not written by the privilege or the dominant, it was not written. If it were not said by whoever, it was not said. You see where I'm going from here. Even when I talk about the issue, when next we talk about the identity, about who we are as against who we want to be. And when I said, science found and said the Negro is not any more than the white man, he interrupts the standard, the narrative, because the narrative helps to condition a particular behavior, which is systematic, which continues the status quo and privilege in society. It was not discovered, Jamaica was discovered by Christopher Columbus because and Jamaica and the New World did the New World, which was the West Indies, is part of the New World. The New World, the Caribbean did not exist. We're studying Caribbean thought. The Caribbean did not exist. Jamaica didn't exist. The islands didn't exist. It was not on any map. So because it was not on their map, which was the standard, which was normative. You measure things against the standard. Okay? And so if it's just as we are talking about today. Today, fast forward millions of years, science. Science is the arbiter of all truth. It's no longer religion, but science is making the same mistake that religion did many years ago, believing that it is the arbiter of all truth. Nothing exists. Religion said that it is the arbiter of all truth. There is no truth outside of God's truth. And when you study the introduction to psychology, you talk about J. Adams and looking about the marriage between, can there be a marriage between psychology and theology? Can there be a marriage between psychology and theology? There are those of the orthodox view who believe that all truth is God's truth. And so psychology does not exist in people's mind outside of a theology, okay? It was hard for people to accept the world was flat. The world was not flat because it was against what people know. It was a discovery. It was a discovery because what was true at the time was a kind of truth that says the church said the earth was the center of the universe and the earth was flat. And when it was discovered that it was not, the church and many people fought against that, burning people at the stake until it was accepted. Of course, there are those people like Kyrie Irving today who is going back to that theory, saying that it is flat. But science came in, and of course, science said, okay, no, science and revolution, you find that knowledge is, with more knowledge and information, people's information were updated. And so they say, and we talk about this issue that as I raised this issue just now, about the issue of discovery. This is all part of privilege and power. This is all part of the issue of privilege. So Christopher Columbus opened up the world. Opened up the world to the new world and opened up the new world to the world. It was not part, it was, okay, but of course, it was not, it was on the Indian map, it was on the Mayan map, the Aztecs map. The American Indians were traveling along the coastline in America for years before the Europeans came there. They were traveling along the coastline there. Okay? The Taino people, the Arawaks, the Aztecs, the Mayan, they were traveling all along those places. And there were writings and so on and so forth. But of course, no, what they did was it was not normative, it wasn't part, so the New World became part of Western civilization. And because the New World became part of Western civilization, the New World had to also subscribe to Western civilization of all things. So yes, it became a discovery. It became part of the world of knowledge, the world of information, the rubric of all things was adjudicated by the West. The West, so that's where you had to judge and adjudicate all things. You judge everything by the West, and it became part of the West, and the West maintained its dominance over all things and its discoveries. And to the new world, which became part of the Western civilization, this is said to have been discovered. And so I said that's the challenge of having standards. That's the challenge of creating systems and so on. Somebody had to have a question, and we will wrap up here. Question. Somebody had a point. Anybody? Someone said, who was saying sir? Oh, Elise. Oh. Okay, we will have to wrap up this class, and this was not what I wanted to talk about. I was supposed to define some very important concepts, and then we will talk about. So the next class we will look at chapter 3 of neoliberalism, looking at a brief overview of Jamaica's socio-political and economic context. And in the book, page 41, I started by saying, historically, Jamaica was stratified along racial. This is the book that I've written, entitled Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty and Resistance, published in 2021. In the book, I started by saying that, it's a brief overview of Jamaica's socio-political and economic context. And it's the subtitle is From 1493 to 1960, From Columbus Buck-up to Independence. Historically, Jamaica was stratified along racial and class lines stemming from the plantation system. Jamaica became a colony of Britain in 1692. In 1650. Oh wow, I made a mistake in my book. 1655. After Britain successfully, in 1692, they had the earthquake in Port Royal. We are actually going to pull this book. This book will no longer be available on Amazon soon. And we're going to update, we're going to adjust the date. Page 41 says, I'm not sure how that came, that error, it's a major error. Jamaica became a colony of Britain in 1692, but supposed to be 1655. I later corrected myself. I corrected myself on page 42, but I'm not sure why this got included in the book right here. It's a major error. We will correct this. So we will pull the book. It won't be available, and we will revise it. It's going to be revised. My book, Neoliberalism, which is a textbook, it's going to be pulled. It won't be available for about a month or 2 weeks. We will revise it, and Palmetto will take over the publication. I'm making that as the author of Neoliberalism. I'm letting you guys know we will be pulling that book. It will not be available. We will do a quick revision of it quickly, just very small, probably just that particular date. We will change 1692 and one other formatting issue, and it's now copyrighted and in the Library of Congress, and we will put it back out. It will be available. It will be in Jamaica shortly. Neoliberalism will be available shortly, along with the second textbook that I'm writing with Professor Emeritus Martin Oppenheimer. But I said that Jamaica is stratified along racial and class lines in the book, stemming from the plantation system, and that Jamaica became a colony of Britain in 1655 after Britain successfully defeated Spain, which profited from the control, which profited from and controlled the island's wealth for a century. Spain profited and controlled the island's wealth for a century. Christopher Columbus opened Jamaica to the global trading map in 1493 when he landed accidentally, or 1492. I don't know why I have 1493. When he landed accidentally or buck up on an inhabited West Indian island. Buck up, I say buck up in the book. This was the advent of colonial capitalism, where European colonists exploited the native Taino people's labor, abused their women, and annihilated their race in Jamaica. The Taino Indians, a subgroup of the Arawakan Indians, a group of American Indians in northeastern South America, inhabited the Greater Antilles, comprising Cuba, Jamaica, Hispaniola, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico in the Caribbean Sea, when Christopher Columbus arrived in the New World. Under Spanish rule, Jamaica was unprofitable as a few Spaniards settled on the island who did not find much use for the island except to serve the Spanish crown, mainly as a supply base. Food, men, arms, and horses were shipped to Jamaica as a means to conquer the American mainland. There was much internal conflict between the local government, who were not given much support from Spain, who did not value Jamaica as a lucrative trading post without any gold or wealth to drain, and the church. Now, there were pirate attacks. Pirate attacks were common. As a result, the Spanish hold on the island was weakened. And on May 10, 1655, the English under Admiral William Penn and General Robert invaded Jamaica and led a successful attack against the Spanish. The Spanish settlers who surrendered freed their slaves and then fled to Cuba. These freed slaves fled to the Jamaican mountainside and established small independent communities that led successful revolts against the British, who eventually abandoned their efforts to re-enslave these Spanish freed slaves known as the maroons. The English would then concern themselves with slave trade with Africa, which became a popular and profitable venture, coupled with the need for cheap labor and the race to supply a rapidly growing demand for sugar. Sugar was king, and the elites of the British crown, unlike the Spanish, saw an opportunity to benefit from Jamaica. The sugar industry grew so rapidly that 57 sugar estates in the island in 1673 grew to nearly 430 by 1739. The elites of the various major crowns, France, Spain, England, Portugal, etc., competed amongst themselves to monopolize sugar so as to gain supernormal profits, but in doing so, destroyed peoples and places under the facade of religion. Now, slave labor traded from Africa was brought to Jamaica in inhumane conditions to work on the sugar plantations. Slave labor traded from Africa was brought to Jamaica in inhumane conditions to work on the sugar plantations. Slaves were dirty, pretty things who weren't even considered members of any class. They, through reproduction, came to outnumber the white youth. They came to outnumber the white population on the island. Now, notice I said that the slaves outnumber the white population. Is that what's going to happen to the U.S. if the colored people become part of the majority? Anyway, moving right along. Is that part of the fears? Now, constant revolts and rebellion in Jamaica led local leaders and maroon groups of black people fighting for freedom helped to secure the abolishment of slavery in Jamaica and the English Commonwealth in 1833. To replace the loss of labor, thousands of Chinese and Indians were sent to Jamaica and to parts of the Caribbean as indentured laborers or bond servants who worked on the plantations for a small wage and or for a contractual period. As a result, by 1943, the Jamaican population was stratified along racial lines by 1943. Now, Stone in 1973, Stone, S-T-O-N-E, Stone, he argued in his book in 1973, argues that plantation societies produced a stratum of whites who were owners, managers, and protectors of property, middle stratum of browns and white collar, browns who were associated with the professional, technical, and white collar occupations, and the lower stratum of poor black ex-slaves. Now, he goes on to say that there was hardly any vertical social mobility permitted except for the movement of a small group of blacks from the lower to the middle, and that income was the principal determinant of social status in Jamaica. On the other hand, income levels are highly correlated with racial group and class. The inequality among classes before independent Jamaica is represented in the disparity that exists between land holdings of groups. Because if you look at land holdings in Jamaica between 1950s and 1972, to 1970s, I'm going to show you this, and I'm going to, in fact, let's look at this landholding. 1950s. Oh. You see the blue? That's land holdings. Okay? The land holdings right there. You see that? White, that's the blue is the white population or people of white racial makeup, which was about a very small segment of the population. That's the land holding. And now let's look at in terms of brown and black. Brown is the second largest holding. You see that can you see the black land holding? Can you see the amount represent? Are you looking at the chart? You cannot. Sorry, you can see black. You can see the blue and the purple, but you cannot see the green. That was land holding in Jamaica between 1950s and 70s. And if you go through the Caribbean, that's what you will have. The percent of if you look at the percent of the population in terms of the occupation in Jamaica or in the Caribbean between the 50s and the 70s, 46% of the population was in agriculture, 17% in personal services, 10% in manufacturing, 9% in construction and transport communication, and 7%. So the 9% of the population who worked in construction and transportation and communication were white. That's what happened. We talk about, many people think that Jamaica was not stratified among, but we were stratified among in terms of racial lines. And in a sense, even today, you still find that the browner you are, the browner you are, you still the browner you are, the more property you have, or access to it, or property you have, in a sense. Because you talk about the racial lines in the middle class or the upper class in Jamaica. We have we talk about population in Jamaica, or the racial class, talk about the Jews and the coming of the Jews. And we talk about the 7 Jewish families in Jamaica. I can talk about that, the 7 Jewish families, the Mafoods and so on. My dad was an architect, and he was a builder. He worked for the Jews in Jamaica. He did work for the Jews. He built houses for the Jews, very big houses. He worked for the Mafoods and the Matalons. And I remember one time he took me with him, my father. I'm going to end here. My father took me with him. And my father had his own business, and he could draw, he could do all things. And he could draw very well. He had his own construction business, and he would draw the plan, but he would take me with him. He was very good with math and so on, but when it comes down to writing and English and so on, I was very good. So when I got to 14, my father would take me with him because he started getting a lot of big projects, and he could not understand the writing. So he worked for the Mafoods and the Matalons and so on. I remember one time he wasn't paid. They didn't pay him his money. He finished the work and built all these edifices, and he wasn't paid his money. You know, wealthy people have a way of doing that, some wealthy people. And he had to pay his own workers and staff out of his own pocket. You know, that's what he had to do. While his children and his wife suffered at home. You know, I'll never forget that one time. I'll never forget that, vivid in my mind. But that is why we have to start thinking strategically about things, and important to have to build in contracts in what we do. But as we wrap up, we're wrapping this up, looking at the socio-political and economic context here. We said that the English would then concern themselves with slave trade with Africa, which became a popular and profitable venture, coupled with the need for cheap labor and the race to supply a rapidly growing demand for sugar. Sugar was king, and the elite of the British crown, unlike the Spanish, saw an opportunity to benefit from Jamaica. The sugar industry grew so rapidly that 57 sugar estates in the island. There were 57 sugar industries estates in the island by 1673. It grew from 430 to 1,739 that the sugar estates in Jamaica. The elites of various major crowns competed among themselves to monopolize sugar so as to gain supernormal profits. But in doing so, destroyed people and places under the facade of religion. Slave labor traded for Africa was brought to Jamaica in inhumane conditions. And I think we talked about that because I was on the point that we are stratified by 1943. The Jamaican population was stratified along racial lines. But today, Jamaica is not necessarily stratified along racial lines. But according to Stone, in 1973, in 1943 it was racial line, but by 1973, Stone argued that the plantation system provided a stratum of whites who were owners, managers, and protectors of property, and their legacies exist today. Now, I'm going to stop here. I won't continue because I don't have time, because I think I continue to talk about what happened from 1961 to 1963. So, what is Jamaica's class now? So I'm going to skip that. I think I made a point here. We must point out here that this classification grossly underestimates the classification of society, because I go into it here talking about the middle class, the white class, which was less than 1% of the population, held 43% of the population, the brown middle class, 49%, and so on and so forth. The class is now based on occupation status in Jamaica. Right now, occupation status, as well as race. So yes, while in 1943 it was based on racial lines, in 73 still based on racial lines, but with some amount of with a middle income now. But today it's based on race. Well, it's based on, we still have a racial, so in a sense, we have a class system based, we have a class system with some amount of race. But I've said here that class is now based on occupation status, based on occupation status as well as race. Gordon explains that that this growth was at the expense of the lower classes. So although there is we have a middle in Jamaica, we have a middle class in a sense, and there's a growing middle class. It's at the expense of the lower class because more people are in abject poverty, so on and so forth. Those at the bottom of society experience further abject poverty and income inequality. So although there is a growing middle class, but there's also a growing, that more and more people are falling into abject poverty. A small manufacturing sector was developed, and personal services and construction, transport, and communication sectors grew, so that by 1943, 46% of Black population was in the agricultural sector. But right now, agriculture is not necessarily king in Jamaica. A large percent of the population works in tourism. In 1944, Jamaicans gained universal adult suffrage, which allowed them some semblance of decision-making, and they could form a local assembly to steer their country towards independence. Jamaica gained independence on August 1962, and elected the Jamaica Labour Party as the governing party. For the first 10 years after independence, Jamaica under a JLP government followed a model based on dependent development that the former colony had pursued since the end of the World Wars. The economy grew in the 1950s and 60s by 5.8% per annum. That was very high. And as bauxite and tourism outgrew agriculture as the main GDP earners, agriculture declined drastically in the relative share of agricultural output. Now, the 1950s and 60s were profitable. So Jamaica for Jamaica, that employment grew by 1.8%, unemployment declined, and economists predicted that Jamaica, let me say that again. Economists predicted that Jamaica would be the pearl of the Caribbean, and like Singapore of Asia. That's like Singapore of Asia. Now, despite these economic gains in Jamaica, income inequality increased from 1958 to 1972, as the income of the bottom 40 fell from 8.2% to approximately 7% of aggregate income. I won't read any more from that. I'm reading from the book Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty and Resistance, chapter 3, where I outline and provide a brief overview of Jamaica's socio-political and economic context. And I was supposed to share a little bit from chapter 3 of the book and also begin to delve into chapter 9 that looks at Caribbean Fanonism, and of course, chapter 9 that looks at nationalism and Garveyism. If you have access to chapter 3, chapter 9, chapter 7, please please access it from the library. I am going to try and I was supposed to send chapter 3. So what I'm going to try and do, I'm going to send you excerpted copies of chapter 3, chapter 9, and chapter 7. I will send you chapter 7, chapter 9, chapter 3. Somebody please remind me. I have a new device. My phone broke, so I have a new phone. So I don't have WhatsApp. I have to re-download WhatsApp. So I have not been on WhatsApp. I will try and get back on there as quickly as possible because my phone got destroyed earlier this week. So I have a new phone. Same contact information. But I need to send you chapter 3 that looks at an overview of the socio-political context of Jamaica. It is available on the Audible as well. And also chapter 9 that looks at Caribbean nationalism and Garveyism, and chapter 7 that looks at Caribbean Fanonism from this book, Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty and Resistance. Guys, that is it for class today. We have touched on a lot. Hopefully I'll have time to touch on Bob Marley's film Who Shot the Sheriff. And also we'll get time to wrap up on podcasting and what I would like you to do is start spending some time. What are the expectations? Expectations for the exam is, what is Caribbean Fanonism? What does Fanon have to do with any talk about nationalism? When Caribbean says that the Negro is not enough anymore than the white man, what is he getting to? What is he getting? Or fill in the blanks. The Negro is true or false? Jamaica, some true and false questions, so on and so forth. But we'll get into it, guys. Easy questions, and we will discuss some of the most important concepts. I need you to delve into chapter 3, chapter 9, and chapter 7 of neoliberalism, and easy one. But I don't like to say easy. I don't want to say easy. It's not. I don't like to use the word easy. We shouldn't strive for easy. We should strive for opportunity, for greatness. Yes.
That question about Fanon, what were you saying about us, Fanon?
Thank you guys for watching. Give me a second. Let me wrap up this recording for those of us who are watching. I'm about to end the recording and I'm going to speak directly to my class. Thank you guys so much for watching another class, Caribbean Thought, lecture 11. And if you need copies of this lecture, go to YouTube. It's available in the Neoliberal Realm by Renaldo McKenzie. It will be available in audio podcast pub and on the Neoliberal Realm. Thank you guys, and visit us at anchor.fm/neoliberal/support. Support us at anchor.fm/neoliberal/support and visit us at the Neoliberal. What good? And I am going to stop recording. Now, the exam is going to be easy, but it will provide you, it will ask you to think. You have to think. Okay? I am gonna, the Negro is, fill in the blank. The Negro is.
Recording is not stopped.
Oh, sorry, let's stop.